Picture, if you will, the summer of 335 BCE. The sun is setting over Athens, casting long shadows through a grove of olive trees. Here, a man of 49 walks among his students. He does not speak from a high podium or a royal throne, but in constant motion, pacing the earth as if thought itself required the rhythm of footsteps to exist. This is Aristotle, not merely a scholar but the architect of human consciousness. He was the philosopher-scientist who dared to map the entire terrain of the mind, and tonight we walk that path with him to answer the oldest question of all. What does it mean to live well? This was Aristotle, and in that moment, in those walks through dappled shade, he was engaged in nothing less than the complete reimagining of what philosophy could be. Not merely abstract speculation about distant forms and perfect ideals, but something more intimate, more practical, more concerned with the texture of actual human life. He asked, how should we live? What is the good life? What does it mean to flourish as a human being? And in answering these questions, he would create a framework so comprehensive, so deeply insightful, that 23 centuries later, we still return to his wisdom when we wonder about our own purpose and potential. Aristotle was born into a world of questions, a world being torn apart and remade by the intellectual revolution his teacher Plato had inherited from Socrates. But where others saw only the choice between accepting traditional wisdom or embracing pure reason, Aristotle perceived a third path, a middle way that would honor both observation and contemplation, both the material and the meaningful, both science and wisdom. He would spend his life walking that middle way, and in doing so, he would invent biology, formalize logic, establish literary criticism, pioneer political science, revolutionize ethics, and transform our understanding of what it means to be human. The magnitude of his achievement becomes clear when we realize that for nearly 2,000 years, to study philosophy, science, or ethics in the Western world meant, primarily, to study Aristotle. Medieval scholars called him simply the philosopher, as if no other designation were necessary. Dante placed him in limbo with the greatest minds of antiquity, describing him as the master of those who know. Thomas Aquinas wove Aristotelian reason into Christian theology, creating a synthesis that shaped centuries of thought. Even those who rebelled against him, the early modern philosophers who sought to overthrow his physics, could not escape his categories, his questions, his fundamental way of organizing inquiry into the world. But Aristotle's significance extends far beyond his historical influence. He speaks to something eternal in the human condition. Consider the questions that trouble us in the small hours of the night when we cannot sleep and find ourselves wondering about the shape and purpose of our lives. Are we living well? Are we becoming who we might be? What does it mean to be happy, truly happy, not merely pleased or entertained, but deeply fulfilled? How do we cultivate virtue in ourselves and in our children? What is the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, between success and flourishing? How do we navigate the tension between individual excellence and social responsibility? These are Aristotle's questions. They were urgent for him in the 4th century BCE, when the Greek city-states teetered on the edge of transformation, when old certainties crumbled and new possibilities emerged. And they remain urgent for us today, in our own moment of rapid change and ethical complexity. The particular circumstances differ. Aristotle knew nothing of social media or artificial intelligence, of global markets or climate change. But the fundamental human questions persist, unchanged in their essence across the millennia. What makes Aristotle such a reliable guide through these questions is the quality of his attention. He was, before anything else, an observer, someone who looked closely at the world and refused to let abstract theory override what he could actually see. When he wanted to understand animals, he dissected them, cataloged them, watched them in their habitats. When he wanted to understand politics, he collected and analyzed the constitutions of 158 different city-states. When he wanted to understand ethics, he observed how people actually lived, what actually made them flourish or wither. His philosophy emerged not from pure speculation but from disciplined attention to reality in all its complexity and contradiction. And yet, Aristotle was never merely an empiricist, never content simply to catalog facts. He sought always to penetrate beneath the surface of things, to understand their essential nature, their purpose, their potential. Every acorn, he observed, contains within itself the blueprint and drive toward becoming an oak tree. Every human being, likewise, contains the potential for a specific kind of flourishing, what he called eudaimonia, often translated as happiness but meaning something richer. Fulfillment, flourishing, the full realization of our nature as rational, social, ethical beings. This insight, that we each contain a potential self waiting to be actualized, stands as one of Aristotle's most profound contributions to our understanding of human psychology. Long before modern developmental psychology, before theories of self-actualization and personal growth, Aristotle understood that we are not static beings but dynamic processes of becoming. We are not born complete but must, through conscious effort and proper habituation, grow into our fullest expression. The sculptor does not create the form already exists potentially in the marble. The sculptor's art consists in removing what conceals that form. Similarly, the ethical life consists in removing the obstacles, ignorance, vice, misdirected desire, that prevent us from becoming who we truly are. Chapter 1. The Prophetic Vision. What's remarkable, what edges toward the uncanny, is how many of Aristotle's insights anticipated discoveries that would only be validated centuries or even millennia later. Consider his biology. While his astronomy and physics would eventually be superseded, his biological observations were so acute, so carefully recorded, that modern naturalists still marvel at their accuracy. He correctly identified the whale as a mammal, not a fish, an insight that would be lost and then rediscovered in the modern period. He described the development of the chicken embryo with such precision that his account remained unsurpassed until the microscope made more detailed observation possible. He understood that the brain served as a cooling organ for the blood, not quite right about the mechanism, but grasping an important relationship between neural activity and temperature regulation that neuroscience continues to explore. But Aristotle's prophetic vision extends far beyond his biological observations. His ethics, his psychology, his understanding of human development, these prove remarkably compatible with contemporary scientific findings. Modern virtue ethics, one of the most vibrant movements in contemporary moral philosophy, explicitly returns to Aristotelian foundations. Psychologists studying character development, habit formation, and human flourishing consistently find themselves rediscovering Aristotelian insights. Consider, for instance, Aristotle's understanding of habit and character formation. He taught that virtues are not innate gifts but learned dispositions, acquired through repeated practice until they become second nature. We become just by doing just acts, he wrote, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts. This might sound obvious to us now, but only because behavioral psychology and neuroscience have spent the last century confirming what Aristotle understood through careful observation and reflection. We now know about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through repeated actions. We understand that behavior shapes neural pathways, that practice literally changes the structure of our brains. We've mapped the mechanisms by which habits form, by which repeated choices create lasting dispositions. Aristotle knew none of this technical detail, yet he grasped the essential truth. Character is built through action, and we become what we repeatedly do. Or consider his sophisticated understanding of emotion. The ancient world tended toward two extremes, either viewing emotions as divine gifts or madnesses, or dismissing them as irrational disturbances to be suppressed. Aristotle took a third path, arguing that emotions themselves are neither good nor bad. What matters is experiencing the right emotion, to the right degree, at the right time, toward the right object, for the right reason. This nuanced view prefigures contemporary research in emotional intelligence, which emphasizes not the elimination of emotion, but its appropriate regulation and expression. Modern psychology speaks of emotional granularity, of the importance of feeling emotions proportionate to their cause. Aristotle understood this over 2 millennia ago. His political philosophy, too, proves prophetically relevant. He warned against extreme inequality, arguing that a large middle class was essential for political stability. He analyzed how democracy could degenerate into mob rule, how oligarchy bred resentment, how tyranny emerged from both excessive democracy and concentrated wealth. He understood that political systems shape character, and character, in turn, shapes political systems, an insight that political psychologists today explore through empirical research, but that Aristotle grasped through acute observation of the Greek city-states in his own time. Perhaps most prophetically, Aristotle understood something that the modern world, in its focus on pleasure, achievement, and success, often forgets: that human flourishing is not a feeling but an activity, not a destination but a way of living. Happiness, he insisted, is not something that happens to us but something we do. It consists in the excellent performance of our characteristic activity as rational, social beings. This insight challenges the hedonic treadmill, the endless pursuit of pleasant experiences that characterizes so much of contemporary life. Modern psychology, in its study of meaning, purpose, and well-being, increasingly confirms what Aristotle taught. Lasting fulfillment comes not from pleasure but from engagement, not from comfort but from growth, not from getting what we want but from becoming who we are capable of being. The essential questions. As we embark on this journey through Aristotle's thought, we are guided by certain fundamental questions, questions that have occupied thoughtful humans across all ages and cultures, questions that likely brought you to this exploration tonight. First, what does it mean to live well, to flourish as a human being? This is not asking how to be successful by society's standards, how to achieve wealth or status or fame. Rather, it asks what constitutes genuine human flourishing, what the Greeks called eudaimonia. In our contemporary world, we are surrounded by competing visions of the good life. Consumer culture tells us that happiness comes from acquisition, from owning more, experiencing more, achieving more. Self-help literature often suggests that happiness is a matter of positive thinking, of manifesting desires, of following your bliss. Political ideologies offer their own answers, whether framing happiness in terms of freedom, equality, security, or power. But what if all these visions miss something essential? What if the good life is neither a destination we reach nor a feeling we sustain, but rather a kind of activity, a way of engaging with the world that brings out the best in our nature? Aristotle will offer us a vision of human flourishing that is at once more demanding and more satisfying than the easy answers of our age. It is a vision that matters now, in this moment of your life, as you lie in the darkness wondering whether you are living the life you were meant to live. Second, how do we become virtuous? How do we cultivate excellence of character? Perhaps you have found yourself in moments of moral confusion, uncertain what the right thing to do might be. Or perhaps you have known what was right but found yourself unable to do it, divided against yourself, aware of your failure even as you committed it. The gap between knowing the good and doing the good, this ancient problem that St. Paul would articulate as the good that I would, I do not, the evil that I would not, that I do, Aristotle understood deeply. His ethics offers not merely a set of rules to follow but a developmental psychology of virtue, a practical philosophy for becoming better versions of ourselves. You see, Aristotle recognized that moral knowledge alone is insufficient. We can know that courage is good without being courageous, that generosity is admirable without being generous. The question, then, is not merely what virtue is, but how we acquire it, how we transform ourselves from people who admire virtue to people who embody it. This question has profound relevance for anyone seeking personal growth, anyone trying to change destructive patterns, anyone hoping to live with greater integrity and purpose. Third, what is the relationship between reason and emotion, between thinking and feeling? We live in a culture that often sets these in opposition, either elevating pure rationality and dismissing emotion as weakness, or celebrating authentic feeling and dismissing reason as cold calculation. But what if this dichotomy is false? What if the fullest human life requires both thinking and feeling, properly integrated and harmonized? Aristotle will show us that reason is not the enemy of emotion but its proper guide and governor, and that emotion is not the enemy of reason but its necessary complement. The virtuous person, in his vision, does not suppress emotion but educates it, does not eliminate desire but directs it toward worthy objects. This question matters intensely in our own lives. How do we make good decisions when our emotions pull us in one direction and our rational analysis suggests another? How do we honor our feelings without being enslaved by them? How do we think clearly without becoming cold and disconnected from what matters? These are not abstract philosophical problems, but daily challenges in relationships, careers, and the ongoing project of building a meaningful life. Fourth, what is the purpose of community, and how does individual flourishing relate to the common good? Aristotle famously declared that human beings are political animals, by which he meant not that we are partisan or power-seeking, but that we are inherently social, that we can only fully realize our nature within communities. But what does this mean for how we live? In an age of radical individualism, where personal freedom and self-expression are often treated as the highest values, Aristotle's insistence on the essential sociality of human nature offers a needed corrective. Yet he was no collectivist either, no believer in the dissolution of the individual into the mass. How, then, do we navigate the tension between self and society, between personal excellence and communal responsibility? This question becomes urgent in our fragmented age, where loneliness and isolation afflict millions even as we remain connected through technology to thousands of others. We sense that something is missing in lives lived primarily through screens, in communities that exist only virtually. Aristotle understood something about the kind of deep, face-to-face community necessary for human flourishing, what he called friendship in its highest form, political community at its best. His insights can help us understand what we've lost and what we might recover. Fifth, how do we find meaning in a world that often seems absurd or purposeless? Though Aristotle lived before the death of the gods, before the disenchantment of the world that characterizes modernity, his philosophy addresses this perennial human need for purpose and significance. He taught that the universe is not a random assemblage of matter in motion, but a cosmos, an ordered whole in which everything has its place and purpose. Human beings in this vision are not cosmic accidents, but beings with a specific nature and telos, a proper end toward which we are oriented. Now, you may not share Aristotle's metaphysical commitments. You may live in what Charles Taylor called the immanent frame, a secular worldview in which transcendent purpose is no longer assumed. But even so, Aristotle's insistence that human life has a characteristic function, that we can speak meaningfully about human flourishing and its opposite, offers resources for constructing meaning in an age when traditional sources of purpose have lost their authority. His philosophy shows us that meaning is not something we find or receive, but something we enact through living well, through the cultivation of excellence, through engagement with what is genuinely worthwhile. Sixth, what is the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, between understanding the world and living well in it? Aristotle distinguished between different kinds of knowledge: theoretical knowledge aimed at truth, practical wisdom aimed at action, productive knowledge aimed at making. But he understood that the highest human life involves all three, properly integrated. Pure theory disconnected from life becomes sterile and inhuman. Pure action without reflection becomes blind and potentially destructive. Pure production without purpose becomes mere busyness. The question, then, is how to live a life that honors all these dimensions of human excellence, how to be thoughtful and active, contemplative and engaged, wise and effective. This matters for anyone struggling to integrate different aspects of themselves, anyone feeling torn between the life of the mind and practical responsibility, anyone seeking a philosophy that can guide real choices in the actual world. Aristotle's thought is uniquely suited to this integration, for he was himself both a theoretical philosopher of the highest order and a deeply practical thinker, concerned with ethics, politics, and the art of living well. These questions about flourishing, virtue, reason and emotion, individual and community, meaning and wisdom, these are the threads we will follow through the labyrinth of Aristotle's thought. They are questions that matter not just historically but existentially, not just intellectually but practically. They are questions for living. To understand Aristotle's answers to these eternal questions, we must first journey to the moment when his own intellectual world took shape, when a young man from Macedonia arrived in Athens and encountered a vision of philosophy that would transform him, even as he would eventually transform it. Chapter 2: The Catalyst. Historical context. To understand Aristotle, we must first inhabit his world, a world both alien and familiar, separated from us by 24 centuries yet united with us in its fundamental human concerns. The year is 384 BCE. In a small Greek city called Stagira, on the Chalcidic Peninsula in northern Greece, a boy is born to a physician named Nicomachus. This detail, that his father was a court physician to the king of Macedon, would prove formative. From earliest childhood, Aristotle inhabited a world where careful observation mattered, where the difference between accurate description and speculation could mean life or death, where knowledge served practical ends. Picture young Aristotle in his father's study, perhaps watching as Nicomachus examined a patient or prepared medicines from herbs. The scent of dried plants, the careful measuring of compounds, the attention to symptoms and their progression, all of this entered the boy's consciousness before he could name it. Medicine in the ancient world was not yet entirely separate from philosophy. Both were concerned with understanding nature, with discerning causes, with promoting human well-being. The physician sought health of the body, the philosopher sought health of the soul. But both required the same qualities: acute observation, systematic thinking, respect for nature's own logic. Aristotle's childhood in Stagira would have been marked by the rhythms of Greek provincial life, the civic festivals, the athletic competitions, the public debates in the agora, the stories of gods and heroes that every child absorbed. But it was also a life lived in the shadow of greater powers. Stagira was near Macedonia, that rough northern kingdom that the sophisticated Greeks of Athens and Thebes viewed with suspicion, as something not quite civilized, not quite Greek. The Macedonians spoke Greek but with an accent. They claimed descent from Greek heroes, but their customs seemed foreign. They had kings, not democracies or oligarchies. They were powerful, ambitious, and dangerous. The 4th century BCE was a time of profound transition in the Greek world. The great age of Athens had passed. The democracy that had given birth to drama, philosophy, and unprecedented artistic achievement had been humbled by defeat in the Peloponnesian War. The city-states that had united to repel Persian invasion now turned their weapons on each other in endless, pointless conflicts. The confidence and clarity of the classical period, the age of Pericles, of Sophocles, of the Parthenon's construction, had given way to uncertainty and fragmentation. Into this world of change and anxiety, philosophy had emerged as a new way of seeking truth and meaning. Socrates had walked the streets of Athens asking uncomfortable questions, exposing the ignorance of those who claimed to know. His student Plato had founded the Academy, that remarkable institution where young men gathered to pursue wisdom through dialectic, through mathematical study, through contemplation of eternal forms. Philosophy promised something that traditional religion and civic participation no longer seemed to provide: a path to certainty, to to truth, to the good life. When Aristotle's father died, the boy was probably around 10 years old. His guardian sent him to Athens to receive the education befitting someone of his status and intelligence. He was 17 when he entered Plato's academy, and he would remain there for 20 years, first as a student, then as a teacher and researcher. 20 years, nearly a third of his life, spent in that remarkable community of scholars gathered around the aging Plato. To understand the magnitude of this experience, imagine entering a world entirely devoted to questions of ultimate significance. The academy was not a university in our modern sense, not a place of professional training or career preparation. It was something more like a philosophical monastery, a community organized around the pursuit of wisdom, the contemplation of reality, the search for the good. Here, young men from across the Greek world debated the nature of justice, the structure of reality, the possibility of knowledge, the character of the divine. Plato himself was by now an old man, famous throughout the Greek world, revered as Socrates' greatest student and the author of dialogues that had already become classics. He taught that the visible world of change and decay was merely a shadow of the real world, a realm of eternal, perfect forms or ideas. The beautiful things we see are beautiful only because they participate in the form of beauty itself. Just actions are just only because they participate in the form of justice. Everything in the visible world is derivative, dependent, imperfect. True knowledge, true reality, true goodness exist only in that transcendent realm accessible to the mind but not to the senses. This vision must have been intoxicating to the young Aristotle. It offered certainty in an uncertain age, permanence in a world of flux, perfection beyond the compromises and corruptions of ordinary life. It promised that philosophy could transcend the limitations of human perspective, could grasp truth itself in its eternal nature. And yet something in Aristotle resisted. Perhaps it was his physician's son instinct to trust observation. Perhaps it was a stubborn empiricism, a sense that the world we can see and touch deserves respect in its own right. Perhaps it was simply a different temperament, more interested in the particular than the universal, more fascinated by the diversity of nature than by transcendent unity. The academy during Aristotle's years there was electric with debate. Plato's students did not simply absorb his teachings. They argued, tested, pushed back. They developed their own positions, sometimes in friendly disagreement with the master, sometimes in sharp opposition. This was philosophy as living inquiry, not dead dogma. And Aristotle proved to be one of the most brilliant and independent of Plato's students, someone who would absorb everything his teacher could offer while preparing to chart his own course. We must imagine long conversations, walking through the academy's grounds or sitting in its shade, as master and student wrestled with fundamental questions. What is real? How do we know? What is the good? How should we live? Plato would have argued for the priority of the forms, for the superiority of pure thought over sense perception, for the philosopher's need to turn away from the visible world toward contemplation of eternal truth. And Aristotle, respectful searching but somehow not quite convinced, would have asked his questions. But master, if the forms are separate from the things that participate in them, how does the participation work? If truth exists only in an eternal realm, how do we explain the order and purpose so evident in nature? If the body is merely a prison for the soul, why does it matter how we live, what habits we form, what communities we create? The shattering. The crisis came gradually, not all at once. Aristotle had spent 2 decades at the academy, his entire adult life from age 17 to 37. The academy was his intellectual home, his community, his world. Plato was not just his teacher but his spiritual father, the one who had shown him what philosophy could be. The other students and teachers were his friends, his rivals, his companions in the pursuit of wisdom. He had been formed by this place, had found his identity as a philosopher within its walls. And then Plato died. The year was 347 BCE. Aristotle was 37 years old in the prime of his intellectual powers, perhaps expecting to succeed Plato as head of the academy. But Plato's nephew Speusippus was chosen instead, a mathematician who would push the academy further toward abstract speculation, further from the natural world that so fascinated Aristotle. The message was clear. Aristotle's approach was not the academy's future. The grief must have been profound. Not just the loss of a teacher, but the loss of a father figure, a guide, a presence that had defined his entire adult life. And mixed with grief, surely, was something else, a sense of intellectual isolation, of being out of step with his community, of having questions and interests that did not fit the dominant paradigm. Imagine the young Aristotle, no longer so young at 37, walking through the academy's familiar grounds, past the plane trees and the statues, feeling suddenly alien in the place that had been his home. But this external loss catalyzed something deeper, an intellectual crisis that had been building for years. The more Aristotle studied the natural world, the more he found himself questioning Plato's theory of forms. It was one thing to speak abstractly about participation and imitation. It was another to explain the actual mechanisms by which living things grow, reproduce, and develop. Where exactly was the form of oak tree while an acorn slowly pushed roots into soil and sent shoots toward light? How did the eternal, unchanging form account for the messy, contingent, time-bound process of actual growth and change? Aristotle had begun collecting biological specimens, observing animals in their habitats, dissecting creatures to understand their internal structure. The more he looked, the more he saw that nature operates according to its own principles, its own logic, not as an imperfect copy of an eternal realm but as a genuine reality in its own right. The order he observed was real, not derivative. The purpose is evident in natural processes, the acorn becoming an oak, the bird building a nest, the heart pumping blood. These were not illusions or shadows but facts demanding explanation. This may seem like an abstract philosophical disagreement, but for Aristotle it cut to the heart of everything. If Plato was right, then the natural world was a kind of distraction, even a trap, pulling us away from truth toward illusion. The proper philosophical life would involve turning away from nature, from the body, from temporal things, seeking instead to contemplate eternal forms through pure thought. But if Aristotle's growing intuition was right, then the natural world was not a distraction but a revelation, the proper object of philosophical attention, the place where order and purpose manifest themselves, where truth can be found through patient observation and systematic thought. The crisis deepened when Aristotle left Athens. He traveled to Assos, a city in Asia Minor where he joined a small philosophical community. Here, far from the academy, he had the freedom to pursue his own researches. He married Pythias, the niece of the local ruler, a marriage that apparently brought him great happiness, though she would die young, leaving him bereft. He continued his biological studies, particularly of marine life, spending hours observing the creatures of the tidal pools, noting their structures and behaviors with meticulous care. And then came the invitation that would change everything. Philip II of Macedon asked Aristotle to serve as tutor to his 13-year-old son, Alexander. Aristotle returned north to the Macedonian court, to the world he had known as a child. For 3 years, he taught the boy who would become Alexander the Great, though whether Aristotle's teaching influenced the future conqueror's character is unclear. What is clear is that this period gave Aristotle the resources and support he needed to develop his own philosophical vision. The full shattering of his Platonic worldview likely occurred during these years away from Athens. Without the daily reinforcement of the academy's culture, with the freedom to pursue his own interests, Aristotle developed a radically different approach to philosophy. Not a rejection of Plato, he would always honor his teacher's memory, always acknowledge his debt, but a profound reorientation. Where Plato had looked up toward eternal forms, Aristotle looked around at the natural world. Where Plato had distrusted the senses, Aristotle trusted careful observation. Where Plato had sought escape from change and multiplicity, Aristotle found meaning and order within them. The transformation. The transformation was not a sudden conversion but a gradual realization, a slow accumulation of observations and reflections that finally crystallized into a new vision. Imagine Aristotle in his study in Macedonia, surrounded by specimens and notes, reflecting on everything he had learned and observed. The pattern he had been circling toward suddenly became clear. Reality is not somewhere else, in some transcendent realm of perfect forms. Reality is here, in the natural world, in the process of things becoming what they are meant to be. Consider an acorn. Plato would say that it is an imperfect copy of the form of oak tree, and that its oakiness is something it borrows or imitates from that eternal form. But Aristotle saw something different. The acorn already contains within itself the potential to become an oak. It has within its nature a direction, a telos, an end toward which it naturally develops given the right conditions. The form of the oak tree is not in some separate realm, but is somehow present in the acorn itself, not as actualized structure but as potential, as the blueprint and drive toward a particular kind of being. This insight, the distinction between potentiality and actuality, became the foundation of Aristotle's entire philosophy. Everything in nature exists both as what it is and as what it might become. The child is actually a child but potentially an adult. The marble block is actually marble but potentially a statue. The student is actually ignorant but potentially knowledgeable. Nature, in Aristotle's vision, is characterized by movement from potentiality toward actuality, by the realization of what things can be. And this means that nature has meaning. Things are not just what they happen to be at any given moment, but are oriented toward what they can become. The acorn's meaning is found in its becoming an oak. The child's meaning is found in developing into a mature adult. And human meaning, human flourishing, is found in realizing our distinctive potentials, in becoming what we are capable of being. This was the breakthrough, not a retreat from philosophy to mere empiricism, but a new kind of philosophy, one that honors both observation and reflection, both the particular and the universal, both what is and what ought to be. Aristotle saw that he could respect Plato's insights about form, purpose, and intelligibility while grounding them in the natural world rather than in a transcendent realm. Forms are real, but they exist in things, not apart from them. Purpose is real, but it operates through natural processes, not from outside them. Order is real, but it emerges from matter's own potential, not from mere imitation of eternal patterns. The transformation was intellectual but also deeply personal. Aristotle had found his own voice, his own vision, his own way of doing philosophy. He was no longer Plato's student, even a brilliant one. He was Aristotle, someone with something new to say, a different way of seeing, a comprehensive philosophical system that would rival and eventually surpass his teachers in influence and scope. When Philip of Macedon died and Alexander ascended to the throne, Aristotle returned to Athens. He was now 50 years old, intellectually mature, ready to found his own school. But he could not take over the academy. Plato's successors were still there, pursuing a different path. Instead, he founded his own school, the Lyceum, in a grove dedicated to Apollo Lysias. Here, for the next 12 years, he would teach, research, write, and build a community of scholars pursuing knowledge in his own way, through careful observation, systematic classification, logical analysis, and always attention to the actual world in all its fascinating particularity. The transformation was complete, from Plato's student to his own master, from someone working within an inherited framework to someone creating a new one, from the world of transcendent forms to the world of immanent purposes, from escape from nature to immersion in it. The philosopher who would teach us how to live well had found his own way to flourish. And in that grove in Athens, walking with his students as he talked, earning his school the nickname Peripatetic, The walking philosophers, Aristotle would develop the comprehensive vision of human flourishing that still speaks to us today. Chapter 3. The Core Framework. Define the system. At the heart of Aristotle's philosophy lies a set of interconnected concepts that together form a complete vision of reality and human life. These ideas are not arbitrary abstractions, but careful attempts to articulate what we actually observe when we pay attention to the world. Let us move slowly through this conceptual landscape, taking time to understand each element and how they fit together. Eudaimonia, the human flourishing. The word happiness does not quite capture what Aristotle meant by eudaimonia. When we say happy, we often mean a feeling, a pleasant psychological state, a sense of satisfaction or joy. But Aristotle was pointing to something more objective, more substantial. Eudaimonia is better understood as flourishing, as living well, as the full realization of human potential. It is not something that happens to us, but something we do, not a feeling we experience, but a way of being in the world. Consider a garden. We say a garden flourishes when the plants are healthy, growing properly, fulfilling their nature. The tomatoes ripen, the roses bloom, the herbs spread their fragrance. This flourishing is not about the plant's feelings. Plants don't have feelings, but about their actualization, their achieving what they are capable of being. Similarly, human flourishing is about actualizing our potential, living according to our nature, performing our characteristic functions with excellence. But what is our characteristic function? What makes human flourishing specifically human? Aristotle argued that while we share certain capacities with plants, nutrition, growth, and others with animals, sensation, movement, what distinguishes us is reason, our capacity for rational thought, for deliberation, for understanding. Therefore, the human good must involve the excellent exercise of rationality, but not rationality alone, isolated from the rest of life. Rather, rationality as it governs our emotions, our actions, our relationships, our understanding of the world. Eudaimonia, then, is living a life in which reason properly directs our actions and emotions. It's important to understand that this is not a single achievement but a complete life. As Aristotle notes, one swallow does not make a spring, nor does one day, and so too one day or a short time does not make a man blessed and happy. Flourishing is not a peak experience but a sustained pattern, not a feeling but an activity, not luck but character in action. Think about someone you know who strikes you as genuinely flourishing, not necessarily the most successful or famous or wealthy person you know, but someone who seems to be living well in a deeper sense. What characterizes their life? Probably a certain integration, a sense that their various activities and relationships form a coherent whole. Probably virtue. They are honest, kind, courageous, wise. Probably engagement in worthwhile activities, relationships that matter, pursuits that express their best qualities. This is what Aristotle means by eudaimonia, and he insists that this is the highest human good, the goal toward which all other goods should aim. Arete, virtue as excellence. The Greek word arete is often translated as virtue, but this too can mislead us. When we hear virtue, we might think of moral righteousness, of following rules, of being good in a somewhat narrow, moralistic sense. But arete means something broader and richer. Excellence, the fulfillment of function, the perfection of potential. A knife has arete when it cuts cleanly. A horse has arete when it runs swiftly and carries its rider well. A musician has arete when they play beautifully. Human arete, then, is human excellence, the full and proper functioning of our capacities as rational, social, embodied beings. Aristotle identified two broad categories of virtue. The intellectual virtues pertain to the mind itself: wisdom, understanding, prudence, scientific knowledge, philosophical insight. These are cultivated through teaching, study, experience, and reflection. They represent the development of our rational capacity in its various forms, our ability to understand theoretical truths, to deliberate about action, to create and produce, to grasp first principles. But equally important are the moral virtues, the excellences of character: courage, temperance, generosity, justice, proper pride, gentleness, truthfulness, wit, friendliness. These virtues are not inborn. We are not born brave or temperate, nor are they taught through abstract instruction alone. Rather, they are acquired through habituation, through repeated practice, through doing virtuous acts until virtue becomes second nature. Here is one of Aristotle's most psychologically astute insights. We become what we repeatedly do. If you want to become brave, you must practice brave acts, not recklessly, but in situations where courage is called for, starting perhaps with smaller challenges and working toward greater ones. Through repetition, through habituation, courage stops being something you must force yourself toward and becomes part of who you are. Your habitual response to fear becomes not paralysis or recklessness, but appropriate courage. This understanding of virtue as learned disposition, as second nature acquired through practice, has profound implications. It means that character is not fixed at birth, that we are not helpless before our temperamental inclinations, that we can change and grow. But it also means that change is not instantaneous, that we cannot simply decide to be virtuous and make it so through willpower alone. Becoming virtuous requires time, practice, patience, and the right environment, teachers and communities that support the development of virtue rather than vice. Consider the person struggling with anger. Aristotle would not tell them simply to suppress their anger or to let it all out. Rather, he would guide them to recognize when anger is appropriate, when genuine injustice has occurred, when a boundary has been violated, when a wrong needs addressing. Then he would help them calibrate their response. Not too much anger, rage, vindictiveness, not too little servility, failure to defend oneself, but the right amount directed at the right object for the right reason expressed in the right way. This is the virtue of proper spirit, neither irascibility nor undue meekness. And this cultivation of proper anger comes through practice. You practice responding appropriately to small provocations. You notice when your anger is disproportionate and work to calibrate it. You study examples of those who display proper spirit. Gradually, over time, appropriate anger becomes your habitual response. You have developed the virtue. Your character has changed. The golden mean, the doctrine of the middle way. Perhaps Aristotle's most famous ethical principle is the doctrine of the mean. Each moral virtue, he observed, stands between two vices, one of excess, one of deficiency. Courage lies between cowardice, deficiency of spirit in facing danger, and recklessness, excess of confidence, insufficient fear. Generosity lies between stinginess, giving too little, and prodigality, giving too much, inappropriate gifts. Proper pride lies between servility, thinking too little of oneself, and arrogance, thinking too much. This might seem like simple common sense, moderation in all things, nothing too much. But Aristotle's doctrine is more sophisticated than mere moderation. The mean is not a mathematical midpoint, not a bland compromise between extremes. Rather, it is the appropriate response to the particular situation. What is right for this person, in these circumstances, facing this challenge? Consider courage again. The soldier facing battle, the whistleblower exposing corruption, the patient confronting a difficult diagnosis, each displays courage, but the specific acts differ dramatically. There is no single formula for courageous action. Rather, the courageous person possesses a disposition to face genuine dangers appropriately, neither fleeing through cowardice nor foolishly charging ahead through recklessness. They hit the mean, the right amount of confidence and caution for this situation. What makes this challenging is that the mean is relative to us, to our particular circumstances and natures. Someone naturally inclined toward timidity needs to practice acts that seem bold to them, pushing toward greater courage. Someone naturally inclined toward recklessness needs to practice caution, pulling back from excessive risk. We each have our own work to do in finding the mean, based on our starting point and temperament. Moreover, the mean is not always literally in the middle. When it comes to murder or adultery or theft, there is no appropriate amount. These are simply wrong. Aristotle distinguished between actions that admit of a mean, anger, giving, confidence, and those that are wrong by their very nature. His ethics is not a simplistic formula but a nuanced framework requiring practical wisdom to apply. The doctrine of the mean also reveals something profound about Aristotle's worldview. He consistently rejected extremes, consistently sought balance and integration. Where others might see only stark oppositions, reason versus emotion, individual versus community, action versus contemplation, Aristotle sought the harmonious integration. This reflects his deepest conviction, that nature seeks balance, that excess in any direction leads to instability and suffering, that flourishing involves the proper coordination of all our capacities in their right measure. Flourishing's practical wisdom. But how do we know what the mean is in any particular situation? How do we determine the right action, the appropriate emotion, the virtuous response? This is where practical wisdom, Flourishing, enters. It is the intellectual virtue that guides ethical action, the capacity to deliberate well about what conduces to the good life. Practical wisdom is not the same as theoretical knowledge or technical skill. You might understand moral philosophy perfectly, be able to define every virtue and explain their interrelations, and yet lack the ability to act well in concrete situations. That's because knowing that courage is the mean between cowardice and recklessness doesn't automatically tell you what to do when facing your own particular fear. Similarly, you might be highly skilled at some craft, a brilliant surgeon or engineer, and yet lack wisdom about how to live. Flourishing is the virtue of good deliberation about life, about ends and means, about what to pursue and how to pursue it, about the right response to this particular situation in all its concrete specificity. It requires experience, attention to particulars, understanding of context, sensitivity to nuance. The practically wise person sees what others miss. They perceive not just the surface situation but its ethical dimensions, its implications, its place in a larger pattern. Consider a parent deciding how to respond to a teenager's misbehavior. Abstract moral principles might tell you that discipline is important, that children need boundaries, that actions have consequences. But practical wisdom tells you whether this particular moment calls for firm consequences or patient understanding, whether this behavior stems from teenage testing of limits or from deeper distress, whether your child needs discipline or compassion, or some delicate combination of both. The practically wise person, Aristotle tells us, is someone who deliberates well about what is good and advantageous for themselves and for the community, not in some specific domain but generally about how to live well. They have developed, through experience and reflection, a kind of intuitive grasp of the right thing to do. They don't need to reason through every situation from first principles. Rather, they perceive directly what the situation calls for. But notice that practical wisdom cannot exist without moral virtue, and moral virtue cannot exist in its true form without practical wisdom. They are inseparable. The temperate person needs practical wisdom to know when and how to pursue pleasure appropriately. The practically wise person needs courage to act on their wisdom, needs justice to direct their wisdom toward right ends. Virtue and wisdom intertwine, each requiring and supporting the other. This integration of wisdom and virtue represents one of Aristotle's deepest insights into human psychology. We are not purely rational beings who can simply calculate the right action and do it, nor are we purely emotional beings driven by feeling and instinct. We are rational animals, beings whose reason must work with and through our emotions and desires, shaping them, directing them, integrating them into a harmonious whole. The good life is not achieved by suppressing our nature, but by perfecting it, by bringing all our capacities into their proper order and relation. The four causes, understanding change and purpose. To understand Aristotle's worldview more fully, we must grasp his theory of causation, one of the most influential frameworks in the history of thought. When we ask why something is the way it is, we are asking about causes. But Aristotle recognized that cause can mean different things, that there are different ways of explaining why things are as they are. He distinguished four types of causes: 4 different kinds of explanation that together provide complete understanding. Consider a sculptor creating a statue. The material cause is the bronze or marble, the matter from which the statue is made. The formal cause is the shape or form, the design that the sculptor has in mind. The efficient cause is the sculptor themselves, the agent who brings the statue into being through their work. And the final cause is the purpose, perhaps to honor a god or commemorate a hero or beautify a public space. All 4 causes are necessary for complete understanding. Knowing only the material, it's made of marble, leaves out why this marble has this shape. Knowing only the form, it's a statue of Athena, doesn't tell you how it came to be. Knowing only the sculptor tells you who made it but not what it's for. And knowing only the purpose doesn't explain how that purpose was realized in physical form. Now, what makes this framework revolutionary is that Aristotle applied it to natural things, not just human artifacts. Living things, he argued, also have all 4 causes. Consider an acorn developing into an oak tree. The material cause is the physical substance, the tissues, the nutrients, the matter that constitutes the growing plant. The formal cause is the structure of oak treeness, the pattern of organization that makes this particular organism an oak rather than an elm or a rose. The efficient cause is the growth process itself, the metabolic and developmental mechanisms by which the acorn transforms. And the final cause is the mature oak tree, the end toward which the whole process aims. This last point, that natural processes have final causes, purposes, ends, was perhaps Aristotle's most important contribution to our understanding of nature. Against the atomists who believed that nature was merely matter in motion, random collisions of atoms producing all the complexity we observe, Aristotle insisted that nature operates teleologically, that natural things have characteristic ends toward which they develop. The acorn doesn't just happen to become an oak tree through random processes. It is oriented toward oakness, directed by its own internal principle toward a specific form of maturity. The heart doesn't just happen to pump blood. Pumping blood is its function, its purpose, the reason it has the structure it does. Eyes are for seeing, ears for hearing, lungs for breathing. Nature is not chaos but cosmos, ordered, purposive, meaningful. This teleological understanding of nature had profound implications for Aristotle's ethics. If natural things have characteristic functions and purposes, then human beings do too. And just as we can speak of a good knife or a good horse, one that fulfills its function well, we can speak of a good human being, one who fulfills the human function excellently. Ethics is not arbitrary, not merely conventional. It is grounded in our nature, in what we are and what we can become. Of course, modern science has largely rejected teleology in nature. We explain biological complexity through evolutionary processes, not through purposes inherent in organisms. The heart pumps blood not because that's its purpose, but because organisms with efficient circulatory systems survived and reproduced. Yet even here, Aristotle's insights retain relevance. We still speak of functions, the function of the heart, the function of neurons, and these functional explanations help us understand biological systems. And when we turn from biology to human life, to questions of how to live and what to pursue, Aristotle's teleological framework remains remarkably compelling. Potentiality and actuality, the dynamic of change. Underlying all of Aristotle's philosophy is a fundamental distinction that becomes the key to understanding change, development, and purpose. The distinction between potentiality and actuality. This is the conceptual breakthrough that allowed Aristotle to honor both being and becoming, both permanence and change, both what is and what can be. Everything that exists, Aristotle argues, exists both actually and potentially. The acorn is actually an acorn, but it is potentially an oak tree. The marble block is actually a block, but potentially a statue. The student is actually ignorant of geometry, but potentially knowledgeable. Potential and actual are not two separate things, but two ways of being for the same thing. Now, what is merely potential doesn't yet fully exist. The oak tree doesn't exist when there is only an acorn. The statue doesn't exist when there is only the block. Knowledge doesn't exist when there is only the capacity to learn. Yet the potential is real. It's not nothing. The acorn genuinely can become an oak. This potential belongs to the acorn's nature, to what it is. The marble genuinely can become a statue. This possibility is real, inherent in the marble's nature as a workable stone. Change, in this framework, is the actualization of potential, the process by which what is potential becomes actual. The acorn growing into an oak is the actualization of the acorn's potential for oakness. Learning geometry is the actualization of the student's potential for geometric knowledge. All change, all development, all becoming can be understood as movement from potentiality toward actuality. This framework solved problems that had vexed previous philosophers. The pre-Socratics had wondered, if change is real, how can anything remain itself through change? How can water become ice and still be the same substance? Aristotle's answer: the water has the potential to be ice. When it freezes, this potential becomes actual, but the underlying substance remains. The substance doesn't change entirely. Rather, one of its potentials is actualized. For human life, this distinction is profound. You are not a fixed, complete entity. You are a being of potential, capable of growth, development, transformation. The person you can become, more virtuous, wiser, more fully yourself. This potential is real. It exists in you now, even if not yet actualized. And the good life consists precisely in actualizing your potential, in becoming what you are capable of being. This is why Aristotle insisted that happiness is an activity, not a state. You never simply arrive at a fixed point of complete actuality. As long as you live, you remain a being of potential, capable of further development. The virtuous life is the ongoing actualization of your potential for excellence, the continuous movement toward fuller realization of your nature. And this is also why Aristotle believed we could speak meaningfully about human nature and human good. Your potential is not random or arbitrary. You have a specific nature as a human being, a characteristic set of capacities and potential excellences. Just as the acorn's potential is specifically for oakness, it cannot become an elm. Your potential is specifically human potential. And flourishing consists in actualizing that potential, becoming the excellent human being you are capable of being. Contrast with rivals. To fully appreciate Aristotle's distinctive vision, we must see it against the background of the thinkers he engaged with and opposed. Philosophy advances through dialogue, through the clash of ideas, through the testing of positions against alternatives. Aristotle's thought emerged from and defined itself against the major intellectual movements of his time. Against Plato, immanence versus transcendence. The most important philosophical relationship in Aristotle's life was, of course, with Plato. For 20 years, he lived within Plato's intellectual world, absorbed Plato's teachings, participated in the Academy's debates. And then, gradually, he moved away, not in hostility or rebellion, but in a fundamental reorientation that would produce an entirely different philosophy. The central disagreement concerned the location and nature of form. For Plato, forms or ideas exist separately from the particular things that embody them. The form of beauty exists in an eternal, transcendent realm. Beautiful things in our world are beautiful only because they participate in or imitate that form. This means that true reality is not in the visible world of change and multiplicity, but in the invisible realm of eternal forms. The philosopher's task is to turn away from the sensible world toward contemplation of these transcendent realities. Aristotle rejected this dualism. Forms, he argued, exist not in some separate realm but in the particular things themselves. The form of oakness is not in a transcendent form of oak tree but in actual oak trees, and potentially in acorns. Form and matter are inseparable except in thought. You cannot have pure form without matter, except perhaps in the divine mind, and you cannot have matter without some form. Real things are always concrete particulars. This oak tree, this horse, this human being, not abstract universals. This disagreement might seem technical, but its implications are vast. If Plato is right, then the sensible world is a kind of illusion, a cave from which we must escape to glimpse true reality. Philosophy becomes a turn away from ordinary life toward pure contemplation. But if Aristotle is right, then the sensible world deserves our attention and respect. Philosophy should study nature, should observe particulars, should engage with the actual world in all its complexity. Reason doesn't transcend experience. It interprets and systematizes experience. Consider what this means for ethics. In Plato's vision, there is a form of the good, an eternal, perfect, transcendent reality that all good things imperfectly imitate. To become good, we must somehow turn our souls toward contemplation of this form, away from the body and its desires, away from ordinary life. Plato's ethics tends toward asceticism, toward the suppression of bodily desires, toward escape from the material world. Aristotle's ethics is entirely different. The good is not something transcendent but something realized in human living. It consists in excellent activity, in the virtuous life lived in community with others. The body and its desires are not obstacles to be overcome, but aspects of our nature to be properly ordered and directed. We don't need to escape from ordinary life. We need to live it well, with virtue and practical wisdom. Plato's response, had he lived to hear Aristotle's criticisms, might have been this: "But my dear Aristotle, if forms exist only in particulars, how do you explain our ability to grasp universals? When you understand what courage is, you understand something that applies to all courageous acts. Where does this universal exist, if not in a transcendent realm? And how can you ground ethics in nature, when nature is change and flux, when what people actually do varies so widely? Don't we need something beyond nature, something eternal and perfect, to provide a standard for judging human actions?" These questions cut deep, and Aristotle's answers show his philosophical sophistication. Universals, he argued, exist in our minds as abstractions from particulars. We observe many courageous acts, many oak trees, many instances of beauty, and our intellect grasps what they have in common, forming a universal concept. The universal doesn't need to exist separately in some transcendent realm. It exists in the particulars themselves as their common form, and in our minds as our abstraction from those particulars. As for ethics, Aristotle insisted that human nature is not arbitrary or infinitely variable. We all share certain capacities, certain potentials, certain needs, and we can determine, through careful observation and rational reflection, what conduces to human flourishing and what undermines it. Ethics is grounded in nature, but nature understood teleologically, as oriented toward characteristic ends. The debate between Plato and Aristotle continues to this day in different forms. Are values discovered or created? Is truth something eternal that we glimpse, or something constructed from experience? Should philosophy seek transcendent principles or attend to concrete particulars? These questions, first articulated in their full depth by Plato and Aristotle, remain alive in contemporary philosophy, theology, science, and culture. Against the pre-Socratics, purpose versus mechanism. Before Socrates turned philosophy toward ethical and political questions, the pre-Socratic thinkers were fascinated by nature, by physis, the underlying principle or principles that explain the physical world. Some argued that everything is ultimately water, others fire, others air. The atomists, particularly Democritus, proposed that reality consists entirely of atoms moving in void, that all the complexity and apparent purpose in nature results from random collisions and combinations of these indivisible particles. Aristotle engaged deeply with these materialist explanations, and he granted them significant truth. Yes, everything requires matter. Yes, efficient causation, one thing acting on another, is real and important. Yes, we can explain many phenomena by understanding the material constituents and how they interact. But is this enough? Can we really explain nature entirely in materialist, mechanistic terms? Consider a house. A materialist might say, a house is bricks, wood, and mortar arranged in a certain configuration. This configuration results from the actions of builders, efficient causes. Understood in these terms alone, however, we miss something essential, the purpose of the house. It exists to provide shelter, to give humans a place to live. Without understanding this purpose, we cannot fully understand why houses have the structure they do, why they have roofs to keep out rain, doors to permit entry, windows to admit light. Similarly with natural things, the atomists wanted to explain everything in terms of matter and efficient causation, atoms colliding, combining, forming structures through mechanical necessity and chance. But this, Aristotle argued, cannot explain the evident order and regularity in nature. Why do acorns always grow into oak trees, never elms? Why do hearts always pump blood? Why does nature exhibit such remarkable adaptation of means to ends? The eye structured for seeing, the wing for flying, the root for absorbing water. The atomist would say, chance. Random variations occur and those that happen to work survive. But Aristotle found this deeply unsatisfying. Nature exhibits too much regularity, too much consistency, too much apparent purpose to be explained by chance. When something happens always or for the most part in the same way, we should infer not chance but nature, an inherent principle or tendency in things themselves. This disagreement about teleology, about whether nature operates purposefully or merely mechanically, divided ancient philosophy and continues to divide modern thought. Modern evolutionary biology, in a sense, vindicates the atomists. Apparent purpose in living things can be explained by natural selection acting on random variation, without invoking inherent teleology. And yet, even modern biologists speak of functions, of adaptations, of what organs are for. The teleological framework remains useful, even necessary, for understanding living systems. More importantly, when we turn from biology to human life, Aristotle's insistence on purpose becomes indispensable. We cannot understand human action, cannot make sense of ethics or politics, without invoking purposes, intentions, goods to be achieved. Purely mechanistic explanations miss what is essential about human life, that we are beings who act for reasons, who pursue goals, who organize our lives around purposes and values. Against the sophists, objective good versus relativism. In Aristotle's Athens, a group of teachers called sophists offered instruction in rhetoric, argument, and political success. Many sophists adopted a relativistic stance toward truth and ethics. Protagoras famously declared that man is the measure of all things, meaning that truth and goodness are relative to each person or culture, that there is no objective standard. What seems true to you is true for you. What seems good to your society is good for your society. This relativism had certain attractions. It seemed to acknowledge the diversity of human customs and beliefs. It avoided dogmatism. It aligned with democratic values. Who are we to say that our way is better than theirs? But it also had disturbing implications. If justice is merely whatever the stronger define it to be, if truth is whatever the clever can make people believe, then philosophy has no foundation, ethics no objective ground, and persuasive rhetoric becomes more valuable than genuine understanding. Aristotle rejected relativism firmly. While he acknowledged that customs vary and that what seems pleasant or good might differ between individuals, he insisted that genuine human flourishing is objective, grounded in our nature as rational social beings. Some ways of life are objectively better than others, not because we say so, not by arbitrary convention, but because they better fulfill our nature, better actualize our potential. Consider health. Can we really say that health is merely subjective, that what counts as healthy is just a matter of opinion? No, the healthy body functions properly, organs perform their functions, systems work in coordination. There are objective facts about health, even if people disagree about them or cultural practices differ. Similarly with psychological and ethical health. The virtuous person is objectively better off than the vicious person, flourishes more fully, actualizes their human potential more completely, even if the vicious person doesn't realize this, even if their culture honors vice. This objectivism about the good made Aristotle vulnerable to a charge. Doesn't this justify imposing your values on others? If you know what's objectively good, why not force people to conform? Aristotle's answer reveals his sophistication. Yes, there are objective goods, but people must be brought to them through education, habituation, persuasion, not force. Virtue must be internalized, must become second nature, must be chosen, not merely conformed to externally. Moreover, practical wisdom requires sensitivity to particular circumstances, to different cultures and contexts. Objectivism about basic goods, courage is better than cowardice, justice than injustice, does not mean rigid uniformity in how those goods are realized. The debate between objectivism and relativism remains very much alive in contemporary philosophy and culture. Are values discovered or invented? Is morality objective or constructed? Can we criticize cultures other than our own, or does that inevitably lead to imperialism? These questions, first crystallized in the conflict between Aristotle and the Sophists, continue to trouble us, and Aristotle's nuanced position, acknowledging both objective goods and the need for practical wisdom in their application, still offers valuable guidance. Chapter 4. Deep dives into sub-theories. Section A. The shadow and human darkness. Now we must turn to a more difficult terrain, Aristotle's understanding of vice, of human darkness, of the ways we fail to flourish and instead corrupt our nature. This is uncomfortable territory, for it requires acknowledging that we are all capable of profound ethical failure, that within each of us lies the potential not just for virtue but for vice. Aristotle understood that virtue and vice are not random occurrences but patterns that develop over time through habituation. Just as we become virtuous through repeated virtuous acts, we become vicious through repeated vicious acts. And here is the disturbing part. Vice, once established, becomes self-reinforcing. The intemperate person enjoys excessive pleasures, which makes them desire more of the same, which further corrupts their character. The coward avoids dangers, which makes avoiding danger feel more comfortable, which makes them more cowardly. Vice creates a downward spiral, a corruption of our nature that becomes ever harder to escape. What makes someone become vicious rather than virtuous? Aristotle identifies several causes. First, poor education and habituation. If we are raised in an environment where vice is modeled and rewarded, where courage is called foolishness and generosity called weakness, we will likely develop vicious dispositions. Character is largely formed in childhood and youth, before we have full rational capacity to choose our own values. The person who grows up without proper moral education starts at a severe disadvantage. Second, pleasure and pain. We naturally pursue pleasure and avoid pain, and this is not in itself wrong. Some pleasures are genuine goods, and some pains genuinely should be avoided. But pleasure can mislead us, can make what is harmful seem attractive, can corrupt our judgment. The glutton finds genuine pleasure in overeating, even though it harms their health. The vengeful person finds satisfaction in harming those who wrong them, even though revenge corrodes their character. Following pleasure without reason's guidance leads us astray. Third, weakness of will, what Aristotle called akrasia. This is the strange and troubling phenomenon where we know what we should do but find ourselves unable to do it. The person on a diet knows they shouldn't eat the cake but eats it anyway. The recovering alcoholic knows they shouldn't drink but reaches for the bottle. They are not ignorant, they know the good. But in the moment of action, desire overwhelms knowledge, and they act against their better judgment. Aristotle's analysis of akrasia reveals the complexity of human psychology. We are not simply rational calculators who automatically do what we know to be best. We are embodied, emotional beings whose desires and appetites can work against our rational judgments. The incontinent person has knowledge, but it remains somehow inert, ineffective. In the heat of the moment, knowledge gets dragged about like a slave, overpowered by passion. But notice, weakness of will, though a failure, is not the same as vice. The incontinent person still knows the good and regrets their failure. The truly vicious person, by contrast, has corrupted their very perception of good and bad. They see nothing wrong with their actions. The cruel person doesn't feel bad about cruelty, they actively enjoy it. The dishonest person doesn't struggle against temptation to lie. Lying has become their second nature, their habitual response. This is a deeper, more troubling corruption, a kind of ethical blindness where the person can no longer even see what they've lost. Consider a real example. Imagine someone, call him Marcus, who in his youth was taught that caring about others was weakness, that success meant trampling competitors, that nice guys finish last. Marcus learned to lie skillfully, to manipulate others, to take what he wanted without concern for harm caused. At first, perhaps he felt some guilt, some tension between these actions and a deeper sense of right and wrong. But over time, through repetition, through surrounding himself with others who shared these values, through achieving success by these means, Marcus's character transformed. Lying became easy, then automatic. Manipulation became second nature. He stopped feeling guilt and started feeling pride in his ruthlessness. Now Marcus is, in Aristotle's terms, vicious. He has corrupted his nature, actualized his potential in a destructive direction. And here's the truly troubling part. Marcus probably doesn't realize his own corruption. He likely sees himself as successful, realistic, strong. He looks at more ethical people and sees them as naive, weak, foolish. His vice has blinded him to his own vice. He cannot see that he has failed to flourish, that he has become less than he might have been, that he has betrayed his own potential for genuine excellence. This possibility, that we might be ethically blind, might have corrupted ourselves without realizing it, should give us pause. How do we know we're not like Marcus? How do we know that what we take for virtue isn't really vice, that our self-understanding isn't self-deception? Aristotle's answer is sobering. We need others. We need friends who will tell us the truth, communities that embody genuine virtue, education that shapes us before we're capable of choosing for ourselves. Self-knowledge is difficult. Ethical perception is easily corrupted. None of us can be trusted to judge ourselves alone. The darkness within us takes many forms. There is the darkness of unexamined desire, the unconscious forces that drive us toward destructive patterns. There is the darkness of corrupted judgment, where we have convinced ourselves that our vices are virtues. There is the darkness of weakness, where we cannot do what we know we should. There is the darkness of habit, where patterns established long ago continue to operate below the level of conscious choice. And there is the darkness of isolation, where lack of community leaves us vulnerable to self-deception and moral drift. Aristotle's analysis suggests that moral psychology is more complex than we might wish. We are not transparent to ourselves. We cannot simply decide to be virtuous and make it so. We are shaped by forces beyond our control, by childhood experiences, by cultural values, by the accidents of temperament and circumstance. And yet, Aristotle insists we remain responsible. For while we did not choose our starting point, we can choose our direction. While early habituation shapes us, we can, with effort and support, rehabituate ourselves. While vice corrupts perception, friendship and philosophy can help restore it. The path from vice toward virtue is arduous. It requires first recognizing that one has been going wrong, no easy thing when vice has corrupted one's very capacity for judgment. It requires finding good models and mentors, people who embody the virtue one lacks. It requires deliberate practice of virtuous acts, even when they feel unnatural and uncomfortable. It requires patience, for character built through years of bad habituation cannot be rebuilt overnight. It requires community, for none of us can sustain ethical transformation alone. But the path exists. Aristotle is not a pessimist about human nature. Yes, we can corrupt ourselves, can fail to flourish, can actualize our potential in destructive directions. But we can also change, can grow, can become better than we were. The person who has been cowardly can become courageous. The person who has been intemperate can become temperate. The transformation requires work, time, support, but it is possible. This is the hopeful core of Aristotle's ethics. We are not fixed at birth or trapped by early experience. We remain, always, beings of potential capable of growth. And there is something else worth noting about Aristotle's treatment of vice. He does not moralize, does not condemn, does not take pleasure in cataloging human failures. Rather, he examines vice with the same careful attention he brings to everything else, observing its causes, its effects, its psychology, its trajectory. He treats the vicious person not as an evil monster, but as someone who has failed to flourish, someone whose development went wrong, someone who might yet be helped toward a better way of being. This compassionate yet clear-eyed approach to human darkness offers a model for how we might think about moral failure in ourselves and others, not with naive optimism that denies real harm or excuses destructive behavior, not with harsh judgment that writes people off as irredeemable, but with realistic acknowledgement of the difficulty of ethical life, the ease of going wrong, the complexity of moral psychology, combined with hope that change is possible and commitment to supporting that change. Section B. The spiritual and metaphysical dimension. Now we must venture into the highest reaches of Aristotle's thought, his understanding of contemplation, of the divine, of what it means for the human soul to touch the eternal. This is territory where Aristotle moves beyond the practical ethics that concern most of us most of the time, pointing toward a dimension of human experience that transcends ordinary flourishing. In the final book of his Nicomachean Ethics, after developing his comprehensive account of virtue and practical wisdom, Aristotle makes a striking claim. The highest form of happiness is not the active life of virtue, but the contemplative life, the life of philosophical wisdom, of theoretical understanding, of nous turning toward the highest objects of knowledge. This is the life most godlike, most purely excellent, most fully actualizing our highest capacity. What does Aristotle mean by contemplation? Not mere thinking or intellectual work in general, not the deliberation of practical wisdom, not the calculation of means to ends. Rather, contemplation is the activity of understanding purely for its own sake, the mind grasping truth in its eternal structure, reason delighting in the exercise of its own highest function. When we understand a mathematical proof, when we grasp the necessity of logical relations, when we comprehend the causes that explain phenomena, in these moments, we are engaged in contemplation. And Aristotle claims that such contemplation is the highest human activity, the one that brings the deepest and most perfect happiness. Why would Aristotle make this claim? It seems to conflict with everything else he's taught about the essentially practical and social nature of human flourishing. How can pure theory be better than the life of virtue lived in community with others? The answer lies in Aristotle's cosmology, his understanding of the divine, and his view of what is most essential in human nature. Aristotle argues that there must be something divine, something eternal and unchanging, that stands as the ultimate source of all motion and change in the cosmos. He calls this the unmoved mover, a being of pure actuality, with no unrealized potential, whose very nature is perfect activity. And what is this activity? Pure thought thinking itself, eternal contemplation of eternal truth. God, in Aristotle's vision, is not a person who acts in the world, not a creator who brought the universe into being, but rather perfect mind eternally engaged in perfect thought. This might seem abstract, distant, irrelevant to human life, but for Aristotle it has profound implications. Human beings possess nous, rational intellect, the capacity for understanding. This capacity sets us apart from animals, makes us more than merely clever or tool-using creatures. And when we engage in pure contemplation, when we exercise nous at its highest, we are doing something godlike, something that approaches the divine life itself. We transcend our mortal, embodied, needy condition and touch the eternal. Consider what happens in moments of deep understanding, when you suddenly grasp something that before was mysterious or confusing. Perhaps you're studying mathematics and suddenly see why a theorem must be true, not just that it is true, but why it could not be otherwise. Perhaps you're contemplating the stars and are struck by the ordered beauty of the cosmos, the sublime regularity of celestial mechanics. Perhaps you're reading philosophy and encounter an idea that illuminates some aspect of reality you'd never properly understood before. In these moments, there is a peculiar joy, not the pleasure of satisfied appetite, not even the satisfaction of accomplished goals, but something more pure, more complete. The mind delights in its own activity, in the exercise of its highest function. Aristotle claims that this contemplative joy is the highest human happiness because it is the most self-sufficient, the most continuous, the most purely excellent. The virtuous life requires action, requires others, requires material goods and favorable circumstances. But the contemplative life requires only the mind itself and objects worthy of contemplation. The virtuous person must alternate between activity and rest, must sleep, must attend to bodily needs. But the philosopher, to the extent humanly possible, lives in continuous activity. For thought itself is not tiring in the way action is, and the objects of thought are always available. Moreover, contemplation is valuable purely for its own sake, not for any external benefit it brings. We pursue wealth to buy things. We pursue honor to feel good about ourselves. We even pursue moral virtue in part because it leads to flourishing. But we pursue understanding simply because understanding is good, because grasping truth is intrinsically worthwhile. Contemplation is the only activity that is truly autotelic, an end in itself, not a means to something else. Now, Aristotle recognizes that pure contemplation is difficult, that most people most of the time cannot sustain it, that it requires leisure, education, favorable circumstances. And he acknowledges that we remain embodied, social beings with needs that contemplation alone cannot meet. We need food, shelter, friends, community. We need practical wisdom and moral virtue to navigate life successfully. The contemplative life is the best life, but it is also the most difficult, the most rare, the least accessible to most of humanity. Yet even if we cannot live entirely as philosophers, even if our lives must include action, practical responsibility, social engagement, still, Aristotle suggests, we should include contemplation as much as we can. We should honor the divine element within us, the rational capacity that sets us apart. We should make space for wonder, for curiosity, for the pursuit of understanding for its own sake. To live without any contemplative dimension is to fail to actualize our highest potential, to live an incompletely human life. This teaching about contemplation reveals a vertical dimension in Aristotle's thought, a recognition that human life points beyond itself towards something transcendent. We are not merely social animals pursuing virtue within communities. We are also rational beings capable of grasping eternal truths, of participating in the divine activity of thought. The good life includes both dimensions, the horizontal dimension of practical virtue and social flourishing, and the vertical dimension of intellectual contemplation and spiritual transcendence. What might this mean for us today, in our busy, distracted, achievement-oriented culture? Perhaps it suggests that we need to make space for contemplation, for activities pursued purely for their own sake rather than for external benefit. Reading philosophy not to get ahead in one's career, but because truth matters. Studying mathematics or physics not to solve practical problems, but because understanding the structure of reality is intrinsically worthwhile. Observing nature, contemplating beauty, wondering about ultimate questions, not as means to other ends but as ends in themselves. The contemplative dimension also speaks to a hunger many people feel, a sense that life cannot be only about practical achievement, social success, even virtue and relationships, as important as these are. There is something in us that reaches toward meaning, toward understanding, toward the eternal. Aristotle's celebration of contemplation honors this reaching, validates this hunger, and suggests that its satisfaction belongs to human flourishing at its fullest. But there is something else important in Aristotle's cosmology, his understanding of soul and its relation to body. Against those who saw soul and body as entirely separate, Plato, or who reduced soul to mere matter in motion, the materialists, Aristotle developed a middle position. The soul, he argued, is the form of the body, the organizing principle that makes a living thing the kind of thing it is. Soul and body are not two separate substances that happen to be joined. They are form and matter of a single substance, inseparable except in thought. This has profound implications. It means that we are not ghosts trapped in machines, not immortal souls imprisoned in mortal flesh. We are ensouled bodies, living organisms whose rational capacity emerges from but transcends our material nature. Mind is not separate from body, but is the form of a body capable of thought. This grounds ethics in nature, makes embodied life meaningful rather than something to escape from, and integrates reason with emotion and desire rather than setting them in opposition. But it also raises difficult questions about immortality. If soul is the form of the body and form cannot exist without matter, then what happens when the body dies? Aristotle's answer is subtle and somewhat unclear. Most of the soul, the capacities for nutrition, sensation, even particular thoughts and memories, perishes with the body. But the highest part of nous, the capacity for contemplating eternal truths, might be somehow immortal. Not personal immortality, not the survival of Marcus or Sarah as individual persons, but perhaps the survival of rational capacity itself, nous returning to or remaining part of divine nous. This teaching is admittedly puzzling, and Aristotle himself seems uncertain about it. What is clear is that he rejected the idea of personal immortality in any robust sense. The good life must be achieved here now, in embodied existence. We cannot console ourselves that failures here will be compensated for in an afterlife. We cannot postpone flourishing to some future eternal existence. If we are to flourish as human beings, it must be in this life, in these bodies, in our actual communities and relationships. This emphasis on embodied, temporal existence makes Aristotle's philosophy more urgent, more this-worldly than Plato's. It increases the stakes of ethical life. We get one chance, one lifetime, one opportunity to actualize our potential. It focuses attention on how we live now, the choices we make today, the habits we form in the present. And it makes community and education more important. For if this life is what matters, if there is no guarantee of cosmic justice or eternal compensation, then we must take responsibility for creating good lives and good societies here and now. Section C. Social and collective dynamics. Human beings are political animals, Aristotle famously declared. By this he meant not that we are partisan or power-seeking, but that we are by nature suited for and requiring polis, political community, organized collective life. We cannot flourish in isolation. We are not self-sufficient individuals who might choose to associate with others for mutual benefit. Rather, community is essential to our nature, built into what we are. Understanding this social dimension of human flourishing is crucial to grasping Aristotle's full vision of the good life. Consider how human development actually works. An infant left alone does not become fully human. Language, reason, moral capacity, practical skills, all these develop only through interaction with others. We learn to speak by being spoken to. We learn to think by engaging with others' thoughts. We learn virtue through habituation in communities that model and reward virtuous behavior. Even the capacity for contemplation requires education, requires teachers and books and traditions of inquiry passed down through generations. This means that the question, "How should I live?" cannot be fully separated from the question, "How should we live together?" personal ethics and political philosophy are inseparable. The person who achieves virtue does so within and through a community. The community that promotes human flourishing is one that cultivates virtue in its members. Individual and society are not opposed but mutually constitutive. Aristotle developed the most comprehensive political philosophy of his age, studying the constitutions of 158 different Greek city-states, analyzing how different political systems shape character, and how different distributions of power affect stability and justice. His political thought is too vast to fully explore here, but certain key insights are essential for understanding his vision of human flourishing. First, political community exists not merely to preserve life, but to enable the good life. The earliest forms of association, family, village, arise from necessity, from the need for reproduction, protection, economic cooperation. But the polis, the fully developed political community, exists for a higher purpose, to enable citizens to live well, to flourish, to actualize their potential as rational, virtuous beings. Politics, in this view, is not a necessary evil, but an essential good, the framework within which human excellence becomes possible. Second, there is a natural hierarchy in political life based on the capacity for practical reason. Aristotle notoriously argued that some people are natural slaves, people who lack the capacity for full rational deliberation, and who therefore flourish best when directed by others. This claim is deeply problematic, was used to justify terrible injustices, and reflects the limitations of Aristotle's own cultural context. But underneath it lies an important insight. People differ in their capacity for practical wisdom, and political systems must somehow accommodate this fact. We see this even today. Some people seem naturally more capable of wise judgment about collective affairs, more knowledgeable about how society works, more able to think through complex policy trade-offs, more sensitive to long-term consequences. Should such people have more political influence? Democracy says no, one person, one vote. Aristocracy says yes, the wise should rule. Aristotle sought a middle way, a system in which all citizens participate but in which education cultivates practical wisdom as widely as possible, and in which institutional structures give appropriate weight to knowledge and virtue. Third, political systems shape character, and character shapes political systems. This is perhaps Aristotle's most penetrating political insight. Tyranny breeds servility and distrust. Oligarchy breeds resentment and faction. Democracy can breed either wisdom and civic virtue or mob mentality and demagoguery. Section D. Love, relationship, and the intimate bonds of flourishing. Having explored friendship in its general form, we must now delve more deeply into the intimate bonds that constitute so much of human life: romantic love, parent-child relationships, the complex dynamics of family and partnership. While Aristotle says less about romantic love than about friendship, his framework provides profound resources for understanding these dimensions of flourishing. In Aristotle's world, marriages were typically arranged, practical alliances between families rather than unions based on romantic love. Yet Aristotle recognized that the best marriages transcend mere utility. They involve philia, a deep friendship between partners who share values, pursue common goals, and care for each other's good. The marital relationship at its best combines utility. Partners help each other practically. Pleasure, they enjoy each other's company. And genuine friendship grounded in mutual respect and shared virtue. What would it mean to build a romantic relationship on Aristotelian principles? First, it would mean choosing a partner not primarily for their attractiveness, wealth, or status, but for their character, seeking someone virtuous with whom you can build a shared life oriented toward genuine goods. Second, it would mean recognizing that love is not primarily a feeling, but a commitment to the beloved's flourishing, a willingness to help them become their best self while allowing them to support your own growth. Third, it would mean understanding the relationship as a shared project of pursuing the good life together, not just two individuals meeting their separate needs. This understanding of love as committed partnership in pursuit of flourishing offers an alternative to both the romantic idealization that sees love as an overwhelming passion that sweeps us away, and the cynical reduction that sees relationships as mere contracts for mutual benefit. Love, in the Aristotelian view, involves both passion and partnership, both emotion and commitment, both individual fulfillment and shared purpose. Consider how this plays out in a real relationship. Maria and James meet in their late 20s. They are attracted to each other. There is passion, desire, the pleasure of being together. But as they get to know each other more deeply, they discover something rarer. They share fundamental values. They both care about living ethically, about contributing to their community, about cultivating wisdom and virtue. They enjoy similar activities: hiking, reading, engaged conversation. They respect each other's judgment and character. As their relationship deepens, they face inevitable challenges. James's career requires a move that complicates Maria's professional goals. Maria's aging parent needs increasing care. Financial pressures create stress. The initial passion settles into something steadier. These challenges could destroy a relationship based only on pleasure or utility, but Maria and James have built something more resilient: a genuine friendship, a partnership grounded in mutual respect and shared commitment to living well. They handle the career challenge by deliberating together about what serves their shared vision of the good life, not just what maximizes individual career success. They address the parent care situation by recognizing that Maria's filial duties are not obstacles to James, but part of what makes her the person he loves, someone who honors relationships and commitments. They navigate financial stress by remembering that their shared life is not about maximizing consumption, but about creating conditions for flourishing. Over the years, their relationship becomes a context in which both become better people. James's natural impatience is tempered by Maria's thoughtfulness. Maria's tendency toward excessive self-criticism is balanced by James's affirming presence. They challenge each other to grow, support each other through difficulties, share in each other's joys and sorrows. Their love has become what Aristotle described as complete friendship. They love each other for who they are, desire each other's good for its own sake, and share in a life oriented toward what is genuinely worthwhile. This is not a fairy tale romance where love conquers all obstacles effortlessly. It is something richer and more realistic, a partnership between two people of character who have committed to building a shared life, who work deliberately to cultivate virtue in themselves and each other, and who find in their relationship not escape from the challenges of living, but a context in which to face those challenges together. Parent-child relationships present different dynamics but reveal similarly profound truths about human nature. Aristotle observed that parental love is one of the most intense and natural forms of philia. Parents love their children even before the children can reciprocate, love them not for utility or pleasure but simply because they are their children. This is love at its most selfless. The good of the child matters to the parent intrinsically, not instrumentally. Yet here too, Aristotle's framework illuminates complexity. The parent's task is not simply to love, but to educate, to shape character, cultivate virtue, prepare the child for adult life. This requires combining affection with discipline, accepting the child as they are while helping them become better than they are, loving unconditionally while holding to standards and expectations. Bad parenting results from imbalance. Pure indulgence fails to guide the child toward virtue. Pure sternness fails to provide the affection necessary for healthy development. Think about a parent, call her Maya, raising a teenage son, Alex. Alex is going through the difficult process of identity formation, testing boundaries, pushing back against parental authority. Maya loves him deeply, wants his happiness, fears for his well-being in a dangerous world. But she must navigate complex questions: when to enforce rules strictly and when to allow experimentation, how to maintain authority while respecting his growing autonomy, how to guide without controlling, to protect without smothering. If Maya follows Aristotelian principles, she recognizes that her goal is not Alex's immediate happiness but his long-term flourishing, his development into a virtuous, practically wise adult capable of living well. This means sometimes saying no, sometimes letting him fail and learn from failure, sometimes enforcing consequences for poor choices. But it also means listening to him, respecting his perspective, acknowledging his growing capacity for judgment, creating space for him to make his own choices within appropriate limits. The relationship must evolve as Alex matures. The parent of a young child exercises near-complete authority. The parent of an adult child offers advice and support, but respects full autonomy. Maya must navigate this transition, gradually sharing more decision-making power while still providing guidance. If she does this well, the relationship will eventually transform into something like complete friendship. Two adults who share affection and mutual respect, who value each other's good, who enjoy each other's company not from dependency but from genuine appreciation. These reflections on intimate relationships reveal something essential about Aristotelian flourishing. It is inherently relational. We do not become virtuous in isolation. We do not flourish alone. The people closest to us, romantic partners, family members, dear friends, are not merely external supports or pleasant additions to an otherwise complete life. They are essential contexts in which virtue is practiced and expressed, relationships through which we become more fully ourselves, bonds that constitute a large part of what makes life worth living. This teaching challenges certain modern assumptions about autonomy and self-sufficiency. Contemporary culture often celebrates the independent individual who needs no one, who is complete in themselves, who perhaps chooses to have relationships but does not need them. Aristotle offers a different vision. We are social beings whose fulfillment comes partly through relationship, whose identity is partly constituted by our bonds with others, whose flourishing requires not self-sufficiency but rich interdependence with other flourishing humans. At the same time, Aristotle's teaching challenges codependency and unhealthy fusion. True friendship respects the other as another self, similar but distinct, close but separate. The friend who has lost themselves in the relationship, who has no identity apart from the other, who exists only to meet the other's needs, this is not genuine friendship but a corruption of it. Healthy relationships involve two complete persons choosing to share their lives, not two incomplete persons trying to become whole through merger. The practical implications are significant. It suggests that one of the most important life projects is cultivating good relationships, choosing friends and partners well, investing time and attention in deepening bonds, working deliberately to be a good friend and partner yourself. It suggests that relationship struggles deserve serious attention, that figuring out how to love well is as important as any career achievement or personal accomplishment. And it suggests that isolation and loneliness are not mere emotional discomforts, but threats to flourishing, obstacles to becoming fully human. Chapter 5: Practical Application. Relationships and Everyday Life. Now we must bring these philosophical heights down to earth, must show how Aristotle's wisdom illuminates and guides ordinary life. For what use is philosophy if it remains abstract, if it does not help us navigate the actual challenges we face? Aristotle himself insisted that ethics is a practical discipline, that its purpose is not merely to understand the good but to become good, not just to know about virtue but to become virtuous. Let us begin with scenarios from relationship life, those intimate arenas where character reveals itself most clearly and where our choices matter most profoundly. Scenario 1: the conflict of anger. You arrive home after a difficult day. Your partner left dishes in the sink despite promising to clean up. This small thing, just dishes, triggers disproportionate irritation. You find yourself snapping, criticizing, saying things you immediately half regret. Your partner responds defensively. What began as minor annoyance escalates into a real argument. You know you are overreacting, but you feel justified, feel your anger is somehow reasonable even as you recognize it's excessive. Aristotle would first help you understand what's happening. The anger itself is not wrong. Perhaps your partner did fail to keep a commitment. Perhaps there is genuine frustration worth addressing. But the anger is excessive, out of proportion to the actual offense, likely contaminated by other frustrations from your difficult day. You are experiencing the vice of irascibility, too much anger too easily provoked. And in acting on this excessive anger, you are both failing to hit the mean and practicing a vicious disposition. What should you do? In the immediate moment, Aristotle would counsel recognizing what's happening and creating space before acting. Notice, I am very angry right now, more angry than dishes warrant. Then, I should not speak or act from this state. Perhaps you take a few breaths, perhaps you step outside briefly, perhaps you simply say, I'm too upset to discuss this calmly right now. I need a few minutes. This is not suppressing anger, pretending it doesn't exist, forcing it down where it will fester. Rather, it's recognizing that this particular anger in this particular intensity is not well calibrated to the situation, and that acting from it will harm your relationship and corrupt your own character further. You are exercising practical wisdom, seeing that this is not the moment for conversation, that your emotional state is distorting your judgment. Later, when calm, you can return to the situation. Perhaps you recognize that your anger was mostly about your difficult day, not really about dishes. Then the right response is acknowledging this to your partner. I'm sorry I snapped. I was stressed from work and took it out on you. That wasn't fair. Or perhaps, reflecting calmly, you realize there is a genuine pattern of unkept commitments worth addressing. Then the right response is raising this thoughtfully. I notice I often come home to dishes left when you've agreed to clean. Can we talk about this pattern? I don't want to nag, but I feel my needs aren't being considered. Notice how different this is from either extreme. The doormat, deficient in proper spirit, would never address the issue, would silently resent, would deny their own legitimate needs. The irascible person, excessive in anger, would make the dishes into a character indictment, would use them as ammunition in ongoing conflict, would perhaps reference every past grievance. The person of proper spirit addresses genuine issues calmly and constructively while letting go of what doesn't matter. Over time, through repeated practice of this kind of calibrated response, you actually change. Excessive anger becomes less automatic. You find yourself less reactive, more able to distinguish real problems from temporary irritations, more capable of expressing legitimate grievances appropriately. Your character has developed. You have moved toward the mean. This is how habituation works. Scenario 2. The seduction of pleasure. You are in a committed relationship. You meet someone at work who attracts you strongly, intellectually engaging, physically attractive, fun to be around. You find yourself looking forward to interactions with this person, perhaps more than with your partner. You start having thoughts. What if? Am I settling? Is this what I really want? One day, subtle signals suggest the attraction is mutual. An opportunity for escalation presents itself. Drinks after work, an empty office, an unguarded moment. What do? Aristotle would frame this as a test of temperance, the virtue concerning bodily pleasures and desires. The temperate person enjoys appropriate pleasures in appropriate measure. They are not puritanical, not denying that attraction is real or that pleasure matters, but neither are they enslaved by every desire, blown about by each passing feeling, unable to consider consequences or commitments. The intemperate person in this situation follows the attraction wherever it leads. Life is short, they tell themselves. I deserve happiness. This connection is so intense, it must mean something. They rationalize, minimize, excuse. Perhaps they fall into infidelity. Perhaps they blow up their relationship pursuing this new excitement. Either way, they are ruled by pleasure, treating their own feeling as supreme authority, disregarding commitments and consequences. But notice, temperance is not prudishness or fear. The temperate person is not someone who never experiences attraction, who suppresses all desire, who denies the appeal of what attracts them. They acknowledge it honestly. Yes, I am attracted to this person. Yes, there is real chemistry. Yes, pursuing this would bring pleasure. But then they consider more fully, I have made commitments to my partner. Those commitments matter. They reflect values I affirm: loyalty, integrity, the long-term goods of stable partnership. Breaking these commitments for the sake of new attraction would corrupt my character, would make me someone who abandons what matters when something shinier appears. Moreover, I know from observation and experience that new relationship energy fades, that what seems like profound connection now might prove superficial, that there are goods in my current relationship, deep knowledge, shared history, tested commitment, that cannot be replicated quickly. The temperate person sets boundaries. They recognize when a friendship is becoming a threat to their relationship and they create distance. Perhaps they are honest with their partner. I'm attracted to someone at work. I wanted you to know. I'm not going to pursue it, but I wanted to be transparent. This honesty itself can strengthen the relationship, can open conversation about needs and desires, can lead to renewal. Or consider a subtler version. You are single, attracted to someone, considering whether to pursue a relationship. You feel intense chemistry, strong desire. But you also notice signs that perhaps this person is not good for you. They are unreliable. They have patterns you recognize as destructive from past relationships. They don't share your core values. The intemperate person ignores these signs, led by attraction. The temperate person acknowledges attraction while also considering character and compatibility, willing to forego even intense pleasure when practical wisdom suggests this is not actually conducive to flourishing. This is the integration of reason and desire that Aristotle advocates. Not suppressing desire, not denying its reality or power, but allowing reason to guide and shape desire, to help you see clearly what genuinely serves your good and what merely seems appealing in the moment. Scenario 3. The challenge of parenting with virtue. Your 10-year-old child has been caught lying, not a small white lie but a significant deception about something important. You feel betrayed, angry, disappointed. Part of you wants to come down hard to make sure they never do this again. Part of you wants to understand why they lied, to respond with compassion. You feel torn, uncertain about the right response. How do you handle this as someone pursuing virtue? First, Aristotle would say, recognize what's at stake. This is not primarily about punishment or consequences. It's about your child's character formation. The goal is helping them become honest, teaching them that truthfulness matters, building in them the disposition toward truth-telling that constitutes the virtue of truthfulness. Both the harsh response, excessive anger, and the overly lenient response, deficient sternness, fail to serve this goal. You need practical wisdom to navigate this situation. That means considering context. Why did they lie? What led to this? Are they afraid of your reaction to mistakes? If so, excessive harshness will make the problem worse. Are they testing boundaries? If so, clear consequences matter. Are they struggling with something they don't know how to talk about? If so, creating space for honesty is crucial. There is no formula here, no rule that determines the right response. You must understand this particular situation, this particular child, this particular moment. Perhaps you start with a calm conversation, not immediately with punishment, not with angry lectures, but with genuine inquiry. Can we talk about what happened? I want to understand. You lied to me about X. That hurt because I need to be able to trust you. Can you help me understand why you lied? Maybe the child reveals that they were afraid of disappointing you, afraid of consequences, afraid of your reaction. This tells you something about your relationship, about whether you've created a safe enough environment for honesty. You might need to adjust your own behavior, making clearer that while lies have consequences, honesty, even about mistakes, is always better than deception. Or maybe the child cannot articulate why they lied, or offers excuses that don't hold up. Then you need to explain clearly why truthfulness matters, not just pragmatically. You'll get in more trouble if you lie. But ethically, we can't build trust and good relationships on lies. Honesty is part of being a good person. And you need appropriate consequences, not excessive punishment driven by your hurt feelings, but measured responses that help the child connect actions with outcomes and internalize that lying is wrong. Throughout, you are modeling virtue. By responding with calibrated emotion, concerned but not rageful, serious but not vindictive, you show what proper spirit looks like. By explaining your reasoning, you help develop their practical wisdom. By enforcing consequences consistently but proportionately, you teach justice. Your parenting, done well, is character education in action, not through lectures about virtue but through how you handle real situations, including difficult ones. Scenario 4. Workplace ethics and integrity. You work in a competitive corporate environment. You discover that a colleague has taken credit for work you did. This has happened before, a pattern where this person seems to advance by claiming others' contributions as their own. You feel angry, frustrated, disrespected. Your immediate impulse is either to confront them publicly, excess, or to say nothing and seethe quietly, deficiency. What does virtue require? Aristotle would identify this as testing multiple virtues simultaneously. Justice demands that credit go where credit is due, that your contribution be recognized, that the colleague not benefit from dishonesty. But justice must be pursued with practical wisdom, understanding the situation fully, choosing tactics likely to achieve just outcomes rather than merely venting anger. Courage is also required, standing up for yourself, addressing wrongdoing, not letting fear of conflict cause you to accept injustice, but not reckless courage that makes things worse. The practically wise response might look like this. First, collect facts. Make sure you understand exactly what happened, what was claimed, what evidence exists of your contribution. Second, consider what outcome you want. Do you want recognition for this particular work? Do you want to stop a pattern of behavior? Do you want to protect others from similar treatment? Third, choose an approach calibrated to achieve these goals. Perhaps you start by speaking privately with a colleague. I noticed in the meeting yesterday you presented the analysis I did as your work. Maybe it was an honest mistake, but I need my contributions to be recognized. Going forward, can we be clearer about who did what? This gives them a chance to correct the behavior without public humiliation, while making clear you will not silently accept being erased. If this doesn't work, you might need to escalate, speaking with a manager, documenting your work more carefully, in serious cases perhaps reporting unethical behavior through appropriate channels. But notice, you are acting not from mere anger or desire for revenge, but from justice combined with practical wisdom about how to actually address the problem. You are hitting the mean, neither doormat nor aggressor, neither silently accepting wrongdoing nor responding with disproportionate hostility. These scenarios illustrate how Aristotelian virtue ethics provides guidance for real-life ethical challenges. It doesn't offer simple rules that can be applied mechanically, but it offers something more valuable, a framework for thinking about character and action, a way of analyzing situations in terms of virtues and vices, an understanding of how to develop the practical wisdom necessary for navigating complexity. The path to wholeness. But how do we actually become virtuous? How do we move from knowing about virtue to embodying it, from admiring good character to possessing it? Aristotle offers us a developmental path, a practical methodology for cultivating excellence. This path is not quick or easy, but it is real and it works. Stage 1. Recognition and aspiration. The journey begins with recognizing that virtue matters, that how we live makes a difference, that we are not fully flourishing and could become better. Perhaps you notice patterns in your life that trouble you, recurring relationship failures, chronic dissatisfaction, behaviors you're ashamed of, a sense that you're not living up to your potential. Or perhaps you encounter someone whose character you admire and think, I want to be like that. I want that integrity, that courage, that wisdom. This recognition and aspiration are crucial. Without them, nothing else can happen. You cannot begin a journey whose destination you don't care about. Aristotle understood that ethics requires motivation, that we must want to become virtuous, and not just instrumentally, because it will benefit us, but because we come to see virtue as genuinely good, as worthwhile for its own sake. How does this motivation develop? Often through exposure to exemplary people, those whose lives demonstrate what virtue looks like in practice. Also through reflection on your own experience, noticing that vicious behavior leads to suffering and regret, that virtuous behavior leads to deeper satisfaction, that the people you most respect are people of character. And sometimes through crisis, a wake-up call that makes clear you cannot continue as you are, that change is necessary. Stage 2. Finding teachers and models. You cannot become virtuous alone. You need teachers, those further along the path who can guide you. You need models, exemplars whose character you can study and emulate. You need community, a social environment that supports rather than undermines your development. This might mean seeking out mentors, either formally or informally. It might mean reading about great lives, studying biographies of people whose character you admire. It might mean choosing friends carefully, surrounding yourself with people who embody virtue or at least share your aspiration toward it. It might mean joining communities organized around values you want to cultivate, religious communities, philosophical discussion groups, 12-step programs, martial arts schools, or any group with a genuine commitment to ethical development. What you're doing here is creating an environment that makes virtue development more likely. You are recognizing that character formation is largely social, that we become like the people we spend time with, that our environments shape us more than we usually realize. You are taking responsibility for choosing environments that will shape you in the direction you want to go. Stage 3. Beginning practice. Now the real work begins. You identify specific virtues you need to develop and begin deliberately practicing acts characteristic of those virtues. If you need to develop courage, you practice brave acts, starting with smaller challenges and gradually working toward larger ones. If you need to develop generosity, you practice giving, finding opportunities to share resources, and genuinely desiring others' good. If you need to develop temperance, you practice restraint, saying no to desires when practical wisdom suggests they don't serve your flourishing. Here's what's crucial. In the beginning, these acts will feel unnatural. The naturally timid person finds brave acts frightening. The naturally stingy person finds giving painful. The naturally impulsive person finds restraint frustrating. This is normal, expected, not a sign of failure. Virtue begins as effortful action that goes against your current disposition. Only through repetition does it become second nature. Think of it like physical training. Someone who has never exercised finds running difficult, even painful, but through consistent practice the body adapts. Running becomes easier, then enjoyable, then something the person craves. Similarly, someone beginning to practice virtue finds it difficult at first, but through repetition, character changes. Virtuous action becomes easier, more natural, eventually preferred. This means you need patience. Character built through years of habituation cannot be rebuilt quickly. You will have setbacks, failures, moments of regression. This is the reality of character development. What matters is the overall trajectory, the long-term pattern, the persistence through difficulty. Stage 4. Developing practical wisdom. As you practice virtuous acts, you simultaneously develop practical wisdom, the capacity to see what situations call for, to discern the appropriate response, to hit the mean. This develops through experience, through reflection on your experiences, through learning from mistakes. Keep a kind of ethical journal. When you face challenging situations, write about them. What happened? How did you respond? Was your response virtuous or vicious? What would a practically wise person have done? What did you learn? This reflective practice helps consolidate learning, helps you extract lessons from experience, helps develop the judgment necessary for practical wisdom. Also seek feedback. Ask trusted friends or mentors, How am I doing? Where do you see me growing? Where am I stuck? What blind spots might I have? Others can often see our character more clearly than we see ourselves. Welcoming their honest feedback is an act of humility and wisdom. Study particular cases, both historical examples and fictional scenarios. How did exemplary people handle challenges similar to those you face? What does their example teach about practical wisdom? Reading biography, literature, even well-crafted film and television can provide vicarious experience that enriches your practical wisdom. Stage 5. Integration and stability. Gradually, through sustained practice and reflection, something shifts. Virtuous action becomes less effortful, more natural, more automatic. You find yourself responding virtuously without having to deliberate extensively. Your character has actually changed. Virtue is becoming your second nature. This doesn't mean you never struggle or fail. Even the virtuous person faces difficult situations, makes mistakes, has to work to maintain their character. But the baseline has shifted. What was once heroic effort becomes normal functioning. What once required constant vigilance now happens naturally. You notice changes in how you experience yourself and the world. Things that once tempted you strongly now hold less appeal. Situations that once provoked disproportionate anger now you handle with equanimity. You find deeper satisfaction in virtuous action than you ever found in vice. You recognize that you have not merely adopted new behaviors but have become, in significant ways, a different person. Stage 6. Passing it on. Having developed virtue yourself, you become capable of helping others on their journey. You can be the teacher, the model, the friend who helps someone else toward their own flourishing. This is the natural completion of the path, not ending with your own perfection, but extending to supporting others' development. This might happen formally, through teaching or mentoring roles, or informally, through how you live, the example you set, the relationships you build. The person who has genuinely cultivated virtue naturally inspires others, naturally creates an environment where virtue can flourish. This is how virtue propagates through communities and across generations. Practical practices for daily life. Let me offer specific practices that support this developmental path. Morning reflection. Begin each day by setting an intention related to virtue. Perhaps, today I will practice patience, or today I will be generous, or today I will speak truthfully. This focuses attention and creates mindfulness about character. Virtue examination. Each evening, review the day ethically. Where did you act virtuously? Where did you fail? What patterns do you notice? What can you learn? This daily practice, done consistently, powerfully supports character development. The golden mean practice. When facing a challenging situation, explicitly ask, what would be too much? What would be too little? What is the mean? This helps develop the practical wisdom to discern appropriate responses. Modeling practice. Choose an exemplar, someone whose character you admire, historical or contemporary. When facing difficulty, ask, what would this person do? How would they approach this situation? This activates your understanding of virtue and provides guidance. Friendship cultivation. Deliberately invest in relationships with people of good character. Schedule regular time with friends who support your virtue development. Be the friend who gently challenges others toward their better selves. Structured virtue practice. Each month, focus on developing one specific virtue. Study it, practice it deliberately, notice opportunities to exercise it. This provides structure to what could otherwise be vague aspirations. Reading and study. Regularly read ethical philosophy, biography, literature that explores character. This feeds your understanding and provides examples to learn from. Temperance challenges. Periodically practice restraint just for the sake of practice, fasting, digital detox, voluntary simplicity. This strengthens your capacity to govern desire with reason, building the virtue of temperance as you would build a muscle through exercise. Courage progression. Identify fears that limit you. Create a hierarchy from smaller to larger challenges. Systematically practice facing these fears in manageable increments. Each time you act courageously, you make the next courageous act a bit easier. Generosity practice. Set aside resources, time, money, attention, specifically for giving to others. Practice giving not just when convenient but as a regular discipline. Notice how this changes both your relationship to resources and your experience of connection with others. Justice work. Look for opportunities to promote fairness in your spheres of influence. This might mean speaking up when credit is unfairly distributed, advocating for those treated unjustly, or examining your own biases and privileges. Justice as virtue requires not just avoiding injustice but actively promoting fair treatment. Contemplation time. Create space for pure thinking, for engaging with ideas for their own sake. Perhaps weekly philosophical reading and reflection. Perhaps time in nature simply observing and wondering. This honors the contemplative dimension of human flourishing that Aristotle considered our highest capacity. Working with specific life challenges. Let us now examine how Aristotelian wisdom helps with common struggles that afflict contemporary life. These are not abstract problems but lived difficulties, challenges you may face, challenges that test character and call for practical wisdom. Anxiety and fear. You wake at 3 a.m., heart racing, mind spinning with worries. Work deadlines, financial pressures, relationship tensions, health concerns, everything feels overwhelming. During the day you function, but underneath runs constant anxiety, a background hum of dread that colors all experience. You've tried various solutions, meditation apps, therapy, medication, with mixed results. What does Aristotle offer? First, he would distinguish between rational and irrational fear. Some of your anxiety may reflect genuine risks that deserve attention. If you're behind on work and facing consequences, that warrants concern and motivates corrective action. But much anxiety is disproportionate, catastrophizing, imagining worst-case scenarios, fearing outcomes over which you have no control. This is the vice of cowardice, an excessive fear that paralyses rather than motivates. The virtue of courage, Aristotle teaches, is not absence of fear, but the capacity to face genuine dangers appropriately while not being overwhelmed by irrational or excessive fears. The courageous person feels fear when fear is warranted, but acts rightly despite it. They do not succumb to panic about remote possibilities or matters beyond their control. Practically, this means developing your capacity to distinguish between fears that call for action and fears that call for acceptance. When you notice anxiety rising, ask, is this fear pointing to something I can and should address? Or is this anxiety about something I cannot control or that is unlikely to happen? If the former, make a plan and act. The very act of taking constructive action reduces anxiety. If the latter, practice accepting what you cannot control, redirecting attention to what you can influence. Aristotle would also point you toward community. Anxiety often worsens in isolation, in the echo chamber of your own worried thoughts. Sharing concerns with trusted friends, seeking counsel from those with practical wisdom, simply being in the presence of others who care about you. This contextualizes fears, reveals that you are not alone, provides perspectives that your anxious mind cannot generate. Moreover, cultivating virtue itself addresses the root of much anxiety. When you know yourself to be a person of character, when you've developed practical wisdom and moral courage, you trust yourself more. You know that whatever challenges arise, you have resources to meet them. You've practiced acting well in difficult situations, so facing new difficulties feels less overwhelming. Character itself is a form of security, not eliminating life's uncertainties, but providing an internal stability that weathers external storms. And finally, Aristotle would remind you of perspective. What are you anxious about? Often, status, reputation, outcomes that in the larger scheme of human flourishing matter far less than we think. The person oriented toward genuine goods, virtue, wisdom, friendship, contemplation, has a kind of immunity to many modern anxieties. They do not need the approval of everyone or the achievement of every goal, because their sense of worth comes from character and their relationships, not from external validation or accomplishment. Depression and meaninglessness. Or perhaps your struggle is different. Not anxiety about specific fears, but a more generalized sense of emptiness, of futility, of what's the point. You go through the motions of daily life, work, obligations, routines, but nothing feels genuinely meaningful. Pleasures that once satisfied now seem hollow. Achievements that once motivated now seem pointless. You wonder why you bother, what any of it matters for, whether the exam in life reveals only absurdity. Aristotle would first acknowledge that this is serious, that what you're experiencing represents a profound failure to flourish. Depression, in his framework, is not merely a mood disorder but reflects a life that has somehow gone wrong, that is not actualizing your potential, that lacks orientation toward genuine goods. This doesn't mean depression is your fault or that you can simply think your way out. But it does suggest that addressing it may require not just medical intervention, but life restructuring. Consider what constitutes eudaimonia, flourishing, the good life. It consists in excellent activity, in the exercise of our capacities, in engagement with worthwhile pursuits, in relationships of genuine friendship, in some measure of contemplative understanding. When life lacks these elements, when we are not exercising our capacities excellently, when our activities feel meaningless, when relationships are shallow or absent, when we never engage our minds with anything substantial, then of course we will feel empty, will struggle to find motivation, will experience the kind of malaise we call depression. The path out, then, involves gradually rebuilding a life oriented toward genuine goods. This is not quick or simple. It may require significant changes in work, relationships, habits, environments. But Aristotle's framework provides direction. Start with activity. Depression makes us passive, withdrawn, inactive. But flourishing consists in excellent activity, not passive reception. Find some activity, however small, that engages your capacities. Perhaps physical exercise, gardening, craft work. Perhaps intellectual, reading, learning something new, solving problems. Perhaps social, volunteering, helping others, being present for friends. The specific activity matters less than that it is activity, that it exercises some capacity, that it moves you from passive to active engagement with the world. Aristotle would especially recommend helping others. There is something about getting outside your own experience, about focusing on someone else's needs, about contributing to another's good, that counteracts depression's self-focus. Volunteer at a shelter, tutor a child, care for an elderly neighbor, not as distraction, not as avoiding your problems, but as genuine engagement with worthwhile activity that connects you to others and exercises your capacity for care. Rebuild relationships. Depression isolates. Isolation deepens depression. Reach out however difficult it feels. Accept invitations even when you don't feel like it. Be honest with friends about your struggle. Seek out communities organized around shared values or activities. The presence of others, the experience of being cared for, the practice of caring for them. This is not peripheral to recovery but central to it. We are social beings. We cannot flourish in isolation. Examine your life structure. Are you doing work that uses your capacities and contributes to genuine goods? Or are you trapped in meaningless labor that damages your spirit? Do your days include any space for contemplation, for engaging your mind with substantial ideas? Or is everything shallow, rushed, purely instrumental? Making changes may be difficult, may require sacrifice, may take time. But living a life fundamentally misaligned with human flourishing inevitably produces suffering. And consider, what are you pursuing? If your goals are primarily external goods, wealth, status, pleasure, achievement for its own sake, then even success leaves you empty, for these goods do not genuinely satisfy. But if you orient toward intrinsic goods, virtue, wisdom, loving relationships, excellent activity, These provide meaning even in difficulty. The person pursuing virtue finds purpose in becoming better. The person pursuing wisdom finds purpose in understanding. The person cultivating friendship finds purpose in loving relationships. These goods cannot be taken from you by external circumstances, and they genuinely fulfill. Aristotle would not promise that these practices eliminate all depression or that meaning is easy to sustain. Life includes genuine suffering, loss, tragedy. But he would insist that a life properly oriented toward virtue, toward friendship, toward excellent activity, toward contemplation, is a life that has resources for facing suffering, that finds meaning even in difficulty, that flourishes to the extent that human flourishing is possible given circumstances. Grief and loss. Or perhaps you face not ongoing depression but acute grief. Someone you love has died. A relationship has ended. A dream has collapsed. You are in that territory of raw pain where philosophical abstractions seem remote and unhelpful. What does Aristotle offer in the midst of loss? First, he would acknowledge the reality and appropriateness of grief. Unlike the Stoics, who counseled detachment and indifference to externals, Aristotle recognized that we are vulnerable beings whose flourishing depends partly on goods outside our control. When we lose someone we love, when we suffer genuine loss, grief is the appropriate response. To not grieve would indicate not wisdom but emotional deadness, would suggest the relationship didn't matter, or that you've closed yourself off from genuine love. Grief in this view is the price of love. If you loved well, if the relationship mattered, if the person was genuinely part of your flourishing, then losing them will hurt terribly. This pain is not a mistake or a weakness. It's the natural response to genuine loss. The depth of grief reflects the depth of love. Trying to avoid grief would mean avoiding love, and that would be to fail to flourish as a human being. But while grief is appropriate, it admits of vices, excesses, and deficiencies. The deficiency is not grieving, not letting loss affect you, closing yourself off from feeling. This is not strength but a kind of ethical failure, an inability or refusal to love properly. The excess is grief that becomes all-consuming, that lasts indefinitely, that prevents you from living. This too is vice, not because you should get over it quickly, but because part of loving the dead is honoring them by continuing to live well, by not letting their loss destroy your capacity for flourishing. The virtuous path through grief, then, involves fully feeling the loss while gradually reintegrating into life. In the acute phase, give yourself to grief. Let yourself feel the pain, remember the person, honor what was lost. Don't rush yourself or let others rush you. Grief has its own timeline, and forcing it undermines healthy processing. But as time passes, begin the work of reintegration. Not forgetting, not moving on as if the person didn't matter, but finding a way to carry them with you while continuing to live. They become part of your history, part of who you are, part of the constellation of relationships that constitute your identity, but no longer the organizing center of your present life. Aristotle would emphasize that this work is both internal and relational. Internally, you must process the loss, must find meaning in it, or at least acceptance of it, must reconstruct your sense of self and world now altered by absence. But relationally, you need others, friends who support you, communities that hold you, perhaps new relationships that gradually open you again to connection and love. You cannot grieve well alone. He would also point to the importance of ritual and commemoration. Ancient Greeks had elaborate mourning practices, funeral rites, memorial celebrations, ways of honoring the dead that were both personal and communal. Contemporary culture often lacks such structures, leaving people isolated in their grief. Creating your own rituals, ways of remembering, of marking anniversaries, of honoring the dead, can provide structure to grief and help integrate loss into ongoing life. And Aristotle would remind you that life continues to call you toward flourishing. The dead themselves, if they loved you, would want you to live well, to find meaning and joy again, to continue actualizing your potential. Honoring them means not dying with them spiritually, but carrying forward what they gave you, letting their influence shape you toward your best self, living in a way that makes their love and influence a blessing rather than a curse. Life transitions and uncertainty. You face a major life transition. Perhaps you're graduating, losing the structure and identity of student life. Perhaps you're changing careers, leaving behind what's familiar for the unknown. Perhaps you're entering or leaving a relationship, having a child, relocating, confronting aging. Whatever the specifics, you're in that destabilizing space where the old patterns no longer fit and the new ones haven't yet formed. Everything feels uncertain, unmoored, unclear. Aristotle would first normalize this discomfort. Human life is characterized by change, by movement from potentiality toward actuality. We are not static beings but dynamic processes of becoming. Transitions are not aberrations but intrinsic to our nature. The caterpillar becoming a butterfly does not know, while in the chrysalis, what it is becoming. Yet the transformation is natural, necessary, the actualization of potential. Still, transitions are difficult because they threaten identity. Much of who we think we are is bound up with roles, relationships, contexts, routines. When these shift, we experience a kind of vertigo. Who am I if I'm not a student, not employed at that company, not married to that person, not living in that city? The question, who am I, which seemed settled now reopens, demanding new answers. Aristotle would encourage you to distinguish what is essential from what is accidental in your identity. Your roles, your accomplishments, your circumstances, these are important but not ultimately definitive. What's essential is your character, your virtue, your capacity for practical wisdom, your relationships of genuine friendship. These travel with you through transitions. These constitute who you fundamentally are. So in transition, focus on character. Whatever else is uncertain, you can work on becoming more virtuous, on developing practical wisdom, on cultivating the excellences that constitute human flourishing. This provides stability amid change, not the stability of fixed circumstances, but the stability of formed character that remains yourself whatever the external shifts. Lean into relationships. Transition tests which connections are deep and which are shallow. Some friendships may fade because they were based primarily on proximity or shared circumstances. But true friendships, complete friendships based on mutual virtue and care, these endure. Invest in these relationships. Let yourself be supported by those who love you for who you are, not just for your role or status. Embrace the openness of the moment. Yes, uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's also opportunity. In transition, you have unusual freedom to reimagine your life, to make changes that seemed impossible when everything was settled. What kind of person do you want to become? What kind of life do you want to build? Transitions create space to ask these questions freshly, without the weight of established patterns. Practice patience with yourself. Character is stable, but adapting to new circumstances takes time. You will feel awkward, uncertain, incompetent in new roles. This is normal. You are learning, growing, stretching into new capacities. The person who takes up running is clumsy at first. Only practice develops grace. Similarly, you must practice new roles, new relationships, new ways of being before they feel natural. And maintain contemplative practice. In the midst of change and uncertainty, create time and space for reflection. What is this transition teaching you? What is it revealing about yourself? What new capacities is it calling forth? Transitions can be profoundly educational if you pay attention, if you extract wisdom from the experience rather than just enduring it passively. Aristotle's ethics is developmental. It recognizes that we are always in process, always becoming, always moving from potentiality toward fuller actuality. Transitions are intense phases of this ongoing process, moments when the becoming is especially visible and dramatic. Handled well, they are opportunities for growth, for developing new capacities, for becoming more fully yourself. Chapter 6: The Legacy and Eternal Teaching. Modern relevance. As we move toward the close of our journey through Aristotle's thought, we must consider his enduring influence and contemporary relevance. For Aristotle is not merely a historical figure, not just someone we study to understand the ancient world. His ideas remain alive, continue to shape how we think about ethics, psychology, politics, and the good life. 23 centuries after his death, we still find ourselves returning to his wisdom, still discovering new depths in his insights. Consider the field of virtue ethics. For much of the modern period, ethical philosophy was dominated by two approaches: utilitarian consequentialism, which judges actions by their outcomes, and deontological ethics, which judges actions by whether they conform to moral rules. Both approaches have significant problems. Consequentialism can justify terrible acts if they produce good outcomes. Deontology can become rigid and divorced from reality, more concerned with rule following than with human flourishing. In the late 20th century, philosophers rediscovered Aristotelian virtue ethics as an alternative. Rather than asking what rules should I follow, or what consequences will this produce, virtue ethics asks, what kind of person should I become, and what would a virtuous person do? This shifts focus from isolated acts to character, from dilemmas to development, from principles to practical wisdom. Thinkers like Philippa Foot, Rosalind Hursthouse, and Alasdair MacIntyre revitalized Aristotelian ethics, showing its continuing relevance and power. Contemporary psychology has also rediscovered Aristotle, particularly through the positive psychology movement. For decades, psychology focused primarily on pathology, on understanding and treating mental illness. But beginning in the late 1990s, psychologists like Martin Seligman began asking, what makes life worth living? What enables human flourishing? What are the character strengths and virtues that contribute to well-being? These questions led them back to Aristotle's framework. Research in positive psychology has confirmed many Aristotelian insights. Studies show that eudaimonic well-being, flourishing based on meaning, engagement, and virtue, predicts better long-term outcomes than hedonic well-being based on pleasure and positive feeling. Character strengths like courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice correlate with life satisfaction, healthy relationships, and resilience. Practices like gratitude, helping others, and pursuing intrinsically meaningful activities enhance well-being more than pursuing wealth or status. Aristotle, working from careful observation and philosophical reflection, grasped what modern empirical science is now confirming. Neuroscience too echoes Aristotelian insights. Research on habit formation shows that repeated actions literally reshape neural pathways, that we can change our brains through deliberate practice, that character is not fixed but plastic. Studies of emotional regulation confirm that healthy emotional life involves neither suppression nor uncontrolled expression, but rather appropriate calibration of feeling to circumstance, exactly what Aristotle taught about the virtues concerning emotion. Research on social neuroscience reveals how deeply social we are, how necessary relationships are for development and well-being, how isolation damages us, confirming Aristotle's insistence that we are political animals who can only flourish in community. In organizational psychology and leadership studies, Aristotelian concepts have proven remarkably useful. The notion of practical wisdom, phronses, helps us understand what distinguishes truly effective leaders from merely competent managers. Research shows that the best leaders possess not just technical skills or emotional intelligence but something more integrative: the ability to see what situations call for, to balance multiple goods, to make wise judgments in complex circumstances. This is exactly what Aristotle meant by practical wisdom. Even in fields seemingly distant from philosophy, Aristotelian ideas exert influence. Medical ethics has moved away from a purely biomedical model toward understanding medicine as aimed at human flourishing, not just disease treatment. Educational philosophy has rediscovered the importance of character formation alongside knowledge acquisition. Environmental ethics has drawn on Aristotelian teleology to articulate why nature deserves respect and care. political theory continues to wrestle with Aristotelian questions about the relationship between individual good and common good, about what political arrangements enable human flourishing. In contemporary culture more broadly, we see hunger for what Aristotle offers. Self-help literature, though often superficial, speaks to genuine needs for meaning, purpose, character, flourishing. The mindfulness movement, though drawing primarily from Buddhist sources, aims at something similar to Aristotelian practical wisdom, clear seeing of reality, appropriate response to circumstances, integration of reason and emotion. The emphasis on authenticity, on living according to your values, on personal growth. These reflect Aristotelian concerns with actualizing potential and becoming who you truly are. Yet contemporary culture often gets things backward in ways that Aristotelian wisdom could correct. We pursue happiness as a feeling rather than as excellent activity. We focus on success rather than virtue. We seek self-fulfillment through consumption rather than through character development and relationships. We treat pleasure as the goal rather than recognizing that genuine flourishing involves sometimes foregoing pleasure for higher goods. We fragment our lives into separate spheres rather than seeking integration. We neglect contemplation in favor of constant activity and distraction. Aristotle offers an alternative vision, one that honors both our need for practical engagement and our capacity for contemplation, both our social nature and our individuality, both achievement and virtue, both the body and the mind. His ethics is demanding but not impossible, idealistic but not unrealistic, philosophical but not impractical. It acknowledges the difficulty of living well while insisting that such a life is possible and worthwhile. The critics and controversies. But we must also acknowledge honestly the limitations and problems in Aristotle's thought. No thinker, however brilliant, transcends the limitations of their time completely. And Aristotle held views that we must criticize, must reject, must learn from while not excusing. Most obviously, Aristotle accepted and theorized slavery. He argued that some people are natural slaves, people who lack full rational capacity, and who therefore benefit from being directed by others. This claim is morally abhorrent and factually false. There is no such thing as a natural slave. The apparent differences in rational capacity that Aristotle observed reflected not nature but the effects of education, opportunity, and social conditions. His mistake here led to incalculable suffering, providing philosophical justification for one of humanity's great evils. Similarly, Aristotle held deeply problematic views about women. He believed women were inferior to men in rational capacity, that they were naturally suited for domestic rather than public life, that they required male governance. Again, these views are false and have been used to justify oppression. The apparent differences in capacity that Aristotle observed reflected not nature, but the effects of a society that denied women education, opportunity, and full participation in public life. His political philosophy, while containing important insights, also reflected and reinforced the exclusiveness of Greek citizenship. Only free adult males born to citizen parents could be citizens. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. Aristotle did not question this arrangement, but theorized it as natural and appropriate. A truly Aristotelian ethics, one that took seriously the equal dignity and capacity for flourishing of all humans, would require radically expanding the circle of concern beyond what Aristotle himself envisioned. How should we respond to these problems? Not by dismissing Aristotle entirely. That would be throwing away immense wisdom because of serious but correctable errors. Rather, we should distinguish between Aristotle's core insights and their historically limited applications. The fundamental ideas, that virtue is acquired through habituation, that human flourishing requires excellent activity, that practical wisdom guides ethical action, that we are social beings requiring community. These remain valid even when separated from Aristotle's mistaken views about who possesses full rational capacity. In fact, Aristotle's own method demands that we correct his errors. He based his conclusions on careful observation of his world, but his observations were limited by the unjust social arrangements of his time. He mistook the effects of oppressive social structures for facts about nature. When we observe more widely, when we examine societies that provide equal education and opportunity, we see that women and people of all backgrounds possess full rational capacity and capability for virtue. Applying Aristotle's method more carefully, with less bias, leads us beyond his own conclusions to a more inclusive ethics. Another criticism concerns Aristotle's teleology, his belief that nature operates purposefully. Modern science largely rejects this view. We explain biological complexity through evolutionary processes, not through inherent purposes. Hearts pump blood not because that's their purpose, but because organisms with efficient circulatory systems survived and reproduced. This seems to undermine a key element of Aristotelian ethics, which grounds virtue in human nature and natural purposes. But perhaps the situation is more subtle. Even if biological teleology is rejected, we might retain purposiveness in human life specifically. Human beings are rational, reflective creatures who act for reasons, who organize their lives around purposes and goals. We cannot make sense of human action without invoking purposes, intentions, goods to be achieved. And we can still speak meaningfully about human flourishing, about what constitutes the full realization of human potential, even without believing that nature as a whole operates purposefully. Some critics argue that Aristotle's virtue ethics is too demanding, that it creates an impossible ideal that ordinary people cannot meet. The fully virtuous person must possess all the virtues in harmony, must exercise practical wisdom consistently, must achieve balance between contemplation and action, must have both excellent character and favorable circumstances. This is an extraordinarily high bar. Most people, through no fault of their own, will fall short. Is this realistic? Is this helpful? Aristotle's response would be that ethics should not lower standards to meet common practice, but should hold up ideals worth pursuing. Yes, perfect virtue is rare and difficult, but this doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it, doesn't mean that moving toward virtue isn't worthwhile even if we never fully arrive. Every step toward courage makes us more courageous. Every act of generosity cultivates generosity. Every exercise of practical wisdom develops that capacity. We can become better than we are, even if we never become perfect. And recognizing the difficulty of virtue should make us humble, patient with ourselves and others, while still committed to growth. Others worry that Aristotle's ethics is too conservative, too focused on conforming to established social norms and practices. The virtues he identifies, courage, temperance, generosity, justice, these reflect the values of his culture. But what if your culture's values are wrong? What if the established practices are oppressive? Doesn't virtue ethics risk simply endorsing whatever is customary? This criticism has force, but Aristotle's framework also contains resources for social criticism. The practically wise person can recognize when conventional practices fail to serve genuine flourishing. They can see that customs that seemed natural are actually contingent and harmful. They can envision alternative arrangements that would better enable human excellence. Indeed, Aristotle himself criticized many aspects of Greek politics and culture, even while remaining embedded in it. A fully developed virtue ethics must include the capacity for cultural critique, for recognizing when social norms undermine rather than support flourishing. Finally, some modern readers find Aristotle's emphasis on excellence and achievement problematic. Doesn't this create a hierarchy, ranking people as more or less valuable based on their virtue? What about those who, through disability, circumstance, or simply lack of capacity, cannot achieve the kind of excellence Aristotle celebrates? Does Aristotelian ethics have room for them? This is perhaps the deepest challenge, and here Aristotle's framework needs extension and correction. Yes, human beings have different capacities. Yes, some achieve greater excellence than others. But this doesn't mean that those who achieve less are less worthy of respect and care, less deserving of support in pursuing whatever flourishing is possible for them. A fully humane ethics must honor both excellence and equality, must celebrate virtue while insisting on the inherent dignity of all persons. Perhaps we can say, all humans have the capacity for some degree of flourishing appropriate to their nature and circumstances, and all deserve support in pursuing this. Excellence matters, but so does compassion. Achievement matters, but so does care for the vulnerable. The final choice. And so, dear listener, Aristotle leaves you at a crossroads. One path leads toward examined life, toward virtue deliberately cultivated, toward practical wisdom developed through experience and reflection, toward flourishing as the goal that organizes all other pursuits. This is the path of becoming who you are capable of being, of actualizing your potential, of living excellently as a rational, social being. The other path leads toward unexamined existence, toward character formed by accident rather than choice, toward life organized around whatever desires happen to be strongest or whatever society happens to value, toward missing your own potential while perhaps achieving external success. This is the path of remaining what circumstances make you, of never fully becoming yourself, of living an incomplete human life. Neither path is easy. The first path requires sustained effort, honest self-examination, willingness to change, patience through the long process of character formation. It demands that you pay attention to how you live, that you take responsibility for who you become, that you sometimes resist powerful desires and social pressures in service of genuine goods. It is the harder path in most ways. But the second path has its own hardness, the hardness of regret, of wondering what you might have been, of arriving at the end of life and realizing you never really lived, never became yourself, never actualized the potential that was always there waiting. It is the hardness of lives that feel empty even when externally successful, relationships that feel shallow even when numerous, achievements that feel meaningless even when impressive. Aristotle does not promise that choosing virtue guarantees happiness in every sense. Bad luck happens. Tragedy strikes even the virtuous. You can live excellently and still suffer loss, still face difficulty, still encounter circumstances that prevent full flourishing. He does not offer a prosperity gospel, does not suggest that the universe rewards virtue with comfort and success. What he promises is this: that virtue is its own reward, that the life of excellent activity is intrinsically worthwhile, that becoming the person you are capable of being brings a satisfaction deeper than pleasure, more stable than success, more meaningful than achievement, that the person of character can face whatever comes with courage and practical wisdom, can maintain integrity through difficulty, can find meaning even in suffering. That virtue makes you more fully human, more truly yourself, more capable of genuine relationship and understanding. He promises that the examined life, the life of deliberate character cultivation, the life oriented toward genuine goods, this life is better than the alternative. Not easier, not more comfortable, not guaranteed to produce what the world calls success, but better in the sense that matters most, more excellent, more fulfilling, more fully realizing your nature as a rational, social being capable of virtue and wisdom and love. The choice is yours. No one can make it for you. Aristotle can explain virtue, can analyze its nature, can describe the path to its cultivation. But he cannot make you virtuous. That requires your choice, renewed again and again across a lifetime, to pursue excellence rather than ease, character rather than comfort, flourishing rather than mere success. Consider what your life looks like on each path. On the path of unexamined existence, you wake each day and follow routines determined by habit and external pressure. You pursue whatever goals you happen to have adopted, probably goals society has suggested, goals that promise status or pleasure or security. You react to circumstances rather than shaping them. You let character form by accident. You remain, largely, unconscious of your own deepest potential. Perhaps you achieve what the world calls success. Perhaps you accumulate wealth, gain status, experience pleasures. But there remains always a sense of hollowness, a feeling that something essential is missing, a question you cannot quite articulate about whether this is really all there is. On the path of examined life, you wake each day with intention. You have asked yourself the deep questions. What is truly worthwhile? What kind of person do I want to become? How should I live? And you organize your life around considered answers to these questions. You pursue goals aligned with genuine goods, virtue, wisdom, loving relationships, excellent activity, contribution to community. When circumstances challenge you, you respond with practical wisdom, seeking not merely what is easy but what is right. You work deliberately to cultivate character, to develop virtues, to become your best self. This path involves difficulty, failure, struggle, but it also involves genuine satisfaction, the deep fulfillment that comes from living with integrity, from actualizing your potential, from becoming truly yourself. On the first path, relationships are instrumental or pleasurable, useful for what they provide, enjoyable while they last but lacking deeper foundation. When the usefulness ends or the pleasure fades, relationships dissolve easily. On the second path, you cultivate complete friendships based on mutual virtue and genuine care. These relationships weather difficulty, deepen over time, become contexts in which both friends become better people. You know the profound satisfaction of being truly known and loved, of knowing and loving another for who they are. On the first path, work is merely instrumental, something you do to earn money, to gain status, to pass time. Perhaps you're successful, perhaps you hate it. Either way, it's disconnected from your deepest values and capacities, a compartmentalized part of life rather than an expression of who you are. On the second path, you seek work that uses your capacities excellently, that contributes to genuine goods, that expresses your character and values. Perhaps this means less money or status, but it means your days feel meaningful, your efforts feel worthwhile, your work integrates with rather than fragments your life. On the first path, pleasure is the default goal. You pursue what feels good, avoid what feels bad, organize life around maximizing pleasant experiences and minimizing unpleasant ones. This produces some happiness but also a kind of emptiness, a hedonistic treadmill where you need ever more intense experiences to feel satisfied. On the second path, you pursue what is good, recognizing that genuine goods sometimes involve difficulty and that some pleasures undermine flourishing. You develop temperance, the capacity to enjoy appropriate pleasures in appropriate measure while not being enslaved by desire. This produces deeper satisfaction than pleasure-seeking ever could. On the first path, you are buffeted by circumstances, reactive, always adjusting to whatever happens, feeling at the mercy of forces beyond your control. Success depends on luck, on externals, on what others think and do. On the second path, you develop character, a stable core that persists through changing circumstances, that faces what comes with courage and wisdom, that maintains integrity regardless of external pressures. You recognize that while you cannot control circumstances, you can control your responses. This produces a kind of freedom and stability that no amount of external success can provide. Aristotle asks you to imagine arriving at the end of life on each path. On the first path, looking back, what do you see? Perhaps achievements, perhaps pleasures, perhaps status and success, but also potential unrealized, character unformed, relationships that stayed shallow, a life that felt more like drifting than deliberate living. The sadness of never becoming who you might have been, never actualizing what was always possible. On the second path, looking back, you see something different. Not perfect virtue, you are human, you failed often, you fell short of ideals. But also, genuine growth, character deliberately cultivated, relationships of depth, activities pursued excellently, wisdom gradually developed, a life that was truly yours because you chose it deliberately. The satisfaction of having lived fully, of having actualized your potential as well as circumstances allowed, of having become the person you were capable of being. Which life do you want? The question is urgent because you are choosing every day through how you act and what you pursue. Character forms through habituation, through repeated choices, through daily practices. The life you live now is creating the person you will become. The path you are on now is leading somewhere. Aristotle invites you to consider, where is it leading? Is that where you want to go? And if not, what needs to change? The choice is difficult because it requires going against powerful forces. Contemporary culture pushes toward unexamined existence, toward pleasure-seeking, toward external success as the measure of worth. Social media amplifies comparison and envy. Consumer culture treats third, political systems shape character, and character shapes political systems. This is perhaps Aristotle's most penetrating political insight. Tyranny breeds servility and distrust. Oligarchy breeds resentment and faction. Democracy can breed either wisdom and civic virtue or mob mentality and demagoguery, depending on education and culture. Political institutions are not neutral containers, but formative forces that shape the souls of citizens. This means we cannot separate questions about the best political system from questions about what kind of people we want to become and what kind of society cultivates human excellence. A political system is good not merely because it protects rights or maximizes utility or follows proper procedures, but because it promotes virtue, enables flourishing, and creates conditions for the good life. Aristotle's own preference was for what he called polity, a mixed constitution combining elements of democracy and oligarchy, with a strong middle class holding the balance of power. He observed that extreme inequality destabilizes societies. When all power and wealth concentrate in a few hands, resentment festers and revolution becomes likely. When the poor majority seizes all power, they tend to plunder the wealthy, leading to instability and eventual tyranny. But when a large middle class exists, people who have enough to be independent and invested in stability, but not so much that they despise those below them, moderation and reason can prevail. This analysis seems remarkably relevant to our contemporary world, where rising inequality threatens social cohesion and political stability. Aristotle understood something that modern political thought sometimes forgets: material conditions matter for virtue. Extreme poverty leaves people scrambling for survival, unable to cultivate virtue or participate meaningfully in political life. Extreme wealth can corrupt character, breeding arrogance and isolation from common life. The middle condition, having enough but not too much, creates the best circumstances for developing practical wisdom and civic virtue. But political community involves more than just institutions and constitutions. It also involves friendship, philia, which for Aristotle includes not just what we call friendship, but all forms of loving relationship. Between family members, between fellow citizens, between collaborators in shared projects. And here Aristotle offers some of his most beautiful and profound teaching. He distinguishes three types of friendship. Friendships of utility are based on mutual benefit. I associate with this person because they are useful to me. They help me achieve my goals. Friendships of pleasure are based on enjoyment. I spend time with this person because I enjoy their company. They make me feel good. Both types are genuine friendships, valuable and important, but they are incomplete and unstable. When the usefulness ends or the pleasure fades, these friendships dissolve. The highest form of friendship is what Aristotle calls complete or perfect friendship, friendship between good people who are alike in virtue. These friends love each other for who they essentially are, not for what they provide or how they make one feel. They desire each other's good for the friend's own sake, not instrumentally. And because virtue is stable, because the good person remains good, this friendship is enduring and deep. Such friendship is rare, Aristotle notes. It requires time and familiarity. You cannot know someone's character quickly. It requires virtue. The vicious person cannot truly be a friend, for they lack the capacity to love another for their own sake. And it requires equality in virtue. There can be affection and goodwill between people of very different character, but complete friendship requires similar excellence. This teaching about friendship reveals something profound about human nature. We are not self-sufficient individuals who might choose to associate with others or might not. We need friends, not merely for usefulness or pleasure, but for flourishing itself. The completely friendless life is not fully human, not complete, even if the person has every other good. Why? Because friendship is where we practice and express virtue, where we come to know ourselves, for the friend is another self, where we participate most fully in shared activity and shared life. Consider what happens in true friendship. You see your friend struggling with a difficulty and you help, not because you expect repayment, not because it makes you feel good, though it might, but simply because your friend's good matters to you for their own sake. Your friend succeeds at something important, and you feel genuine joy, not envy, not calculation about how this affects you, but simple delight in their flourishing. You spend time together engaged in activity both value, philosophical conversation, artistic creation, shared work toward worthwhile goals, and in this sharing both become more fully themselves. This capacity for genuinely caring about another's good, for taking pleasure in their flourishing, for sharing in their life, this is not incidental to human nature but central to it. We are the kind of beings who can love, who can form bonds of deep reciprocal care, who find part of our own good in the good of those we love. And the presence or absence of such relationships makes an immense difference to the quality of life. Aristotle even suggests that the happy person needs friends, which seems puzzling at first. Shouldn't happiness be self-sufficient? But his point is subtle. The happy person needs friends not because they lack something, not to fill a void, but because friendship itself is an essential component of the best life. Sharing good things with friends makes them better. Engaging in worthy activities with others enriches those activities. Loving and being loved actualizes potentials that cannot be actualized alone. This teaching about friendship extends naturally to questions of community and justice. A good political community is, in some sense, an extension of friendship, a shared commitment to living well together, to promoting each other's flourishing, to organizing collective life around what is genuinely good. When Aristotle says that human beings are political animals, he means partly that we need not just friends but a whole network of relationships and institutions that support human flourishing. Justice, in this framework, is not primarily about individual rights or abstract principles, but about proper relationship, giving each their due, maintaining fair reciprocity, ensuring that the community's resources and honors are distributed in ways that reflect genuine worth and contribution. An unjust society is one where relationships are corrupted, where some exploit others, where goods are distributed based on power or birth rather than merit and need. Aristotle's vision of political community can seem elitist and exclusionary to modern readers. He thought only free male citizens were capable of full participation in political life. He accepted slavery. He believed women lacked full rational capacity. These views are clearly wrong and have been used to justify terrible injustices. We must condemn them while also recognizing what remains valuable in his political thought. What remains valuable is the core insight that human beings need community, that political life is not a mere instrument for individual ends, but an essential arena of human flourishing, that how we organize our collective life shapes what kind of people we become, and that the good society is one that cultivates virtue and enables citizens to live well together. These insights transcend Aristotle's own limited applications of them and can inform more inclusive, more just visions of political community. Section D. Love, relationship, and the intimate bonds of flourishing. Having explored friendship in its general form, we must now delve more deeply into the intimate bonds that constitute so much of human life: romantic love, parent-child relationships, the complex dynamics of family and partnership. While Aristotle says less about romantic love than about friendship, his framework provides profound resources for understanding these dimensions of flourishing. In Aristotle's world, marriages were typically arranged, practical alliances between families rather than unions based on romantic love. Yet Aristotle recognized that the best marriages transcend mere utility. They involve philia, a deep friendship between partners who share values, pursue common goals, and care for each other's good. The marital relationship at its best combines utility. Partners help each other practically. Pleasure, they enjoy each other's company. And genuine friendship grounded in mutual respect and shared virtue. What would it mean to build a romantic relationship on Aristotelian principles? First, it would mean choosing a partner not primarily for their attractiveness, wealth, or status, but for their character, seeking someone virtuous with whom you can build a shared life oriented toward genuine goods. Second, it would mean recognizing that love is not primarily a feeling, but a commitment to the beloved's flourishing, a willingness to help them become their best self while allowing them to support your own growth. Third, it would mean understanding the relationship as a shared project of pursuing the good life together, not just two individuals meeting their separate needs. This understanding of love as committed partnership in pursuit of flourishing offers an alternative to both the romantic idealization that sees love as an overwhelming passion that sweeps us away, and the cynical reduction that sees relationships as mere contracts for mutual benefit. Love, in the Aristotelian view, involves both passion and partnership, both emotion and commitment, both individual fulfillment and shared purpose. Consider how this plays out in a real relationship. Maria and James meet in their late 20s. They are attracted to each other. There is passion, desire, the pleasure of being together. But as they get to know each other more deeply, they discover something rarer. They share fundamental values. They both care about living ethically, about contributing to their community, about cultivating wisdom and virtue. They enjoy similar activities, hiking, reading, engaged conversation. They respect each other's judgment and character. As their relationship deepens, they face inevitable challenges. James's career requires a move that complicates Maria's professional goals. Maria's aging parent needs increasing care. Financial pressures create stress. The initial passion settles into something steadier. These challenges could destroy a relationship based only on pleasure or utility, but Maria and James have built something more resilient. A genuine friendship, a partnership grounded in mutual respect and shared commitment to living well. They handle the career challenge by deliberating together about what serves their shared vision of the good life, not just what maximizes individual career success. They address the parent care situation by recognizing that Maria's filial duties are not obstacles to James, but part of what makes her the person he loves, someone who honors relationships and commitments. They navigate financial stress by remembering that their shared life is not about maximizing consumption, but about creating conditions for flourishing. Over the years, their relationship becomes a context in which both become better people. James's natural impatience is tempered by Maria's thoughtfulness. Maria's tendency toward excessive self-criticism is balanced by James's affirming presence. They challenge each other to grow, support each other through difficulties, share in each other's joys and sorrows. Their love has become what Aristotle described as complete friendship. They love each other for who they are, desire each other's good for its own sake, and share in a life oriented toward what is genuinely worthwhile. This is not a fairy tale romance where love conquers all obstacles effortlessly. It is something richer and more realistic, a partnership between two people of character who have committed to building a shared life, who work deliberately to cultivate virtue in themselves and each other, and who find in their relationship not escape from the challenges of living, but a context in which to face those challenges together. Parent-child relationships present different dynamics but reveal similarly profound truths about human nature. Aristotle observed that parental love is one of the most intense and natural forms of philia. Parents love their children even before the children can reciprocate, love them not for utility or pleasure but simply because they are their children. This is love at its most selfless. The good of the child matters to the parent intrinsically, not instrumentally. Yet here too, Aristotle's framework illuminates complexity. The parent's task is not simply to love, but to educate, to shape character, cultivate virtue, prepare the child for adult life. This requires combining affection with discipline, accepting the child as they are while helping them become better than they are, loving unconditionally while holding to standards and expectations. Bad parenting results from imbalance. Pure indulgence fails to guide the child toward virtue. Pure sternness fails to provide the affection necessary for healthy development. Think about a parent, call her Maya, raising a teenage son, Alex. Alex is going through the difficult process of identity formation, testing boundaries, pushing back against parental authority. Maya loves him deeply, wants his happiness, fears for his well-being in a dangerous world. But she must navigate complex questions: when to enforce rules strictly and when to allow experimentation, how to maintain authority while respecting his growing autonomy, how to guide without controlling, to protect without smothering. If Maya follows Aristotelian principles, she recognizes that her goal is not Alex's immediate happiness but his long-term flourishing, his development into a virtuous, practically wise adult capable of living well. This means sometimes saying no, sometimes letting him fail and learn from failure, sometimes enforcing consequences for poor choices. But it also means listening to him, respecting his perspective, acknowledging his growing capacity for judgment, creating space for him to make his own choices within appropriate limits. The relationship must evolve as Alex matures. The parent of a young child exercises near-complete authority. The parent of an adult child offers advice and support, but respects full autonomy. Maya must navigate this transition, gradually sharing more decision-making power while still providing guidance. If she does this well, the relationship will eventually transform into something like complete friendship. Two adults who share affection and mutual respect, who value each other's good, who enjoy each other's company not from dependency but from genuine appreciation. These reflections on intimate relationships reveal something essential about Aristotelian flourishing. It is inherently relational. We do not become virtuous in isolation. We do not flourish alone. The people closest to us, romantic partners, family members, dear friends, are not merely external supports or pleasant additions to an otherwise complete life. They are essential contexts in which virtue is practiced and expressed, relationships through which we become more fully ourselves, bonds that constitute a large part of what makes life worth living. This teaching challenges certain modern assumptions about autonomy and self-sufficiency. Contemporary culture often celebrates the independent individual who needs no one, who is complete in themselves, who perhaps chooses to have relationships but does not need them. Aristotle offers a different vision. We are social beings whose fulfillment comes partly through relationship, whose identity is partly constituted by our bonds with others, whose flourishing requires not self-sufficiency but rich interdependence with other flourishing humans. At the same time, Aristotle's teaching challenges codependency and unhealthy fusion. True friendship respects the other as another self, similar but distinct, close but separate. The friend who has lost themselves in the relationship, who has no identity apart from the other, who exists only to meet the other's needs, this is not genuine friendship but a corruption of it. Healthy relationships involve two complete persons choosing to share their lives, not two incomplete persons trying to become whole through merger. The practical implications are significant. It suggests that one of the most important life projects is cultivating good relationships, choosing friends and partners well, investing time and attention in deepening bonds, working deliberately to be a good friend and partner yourself. It suggests that relationship struggles deserve serious attention, that figuring out how to love well is as important as any career achievement or personal accomplishment. And it suggests that isolation and loneliness are not mere emotional discomforts, but threats to flourishing, obstacles to becoming fully human. The choice is difficult because it requires going against powerful forces. Contemporary culture pushes toward unexamined existence, toward pleasure-seeking, toward external success as the measure of worth. Social media amplifies comparison and envy. Consumer culture treats you as nothing more than appetites to be satisfied through purchasing. The economy pressures you toward endless work, endless productivity, endless striving for more money and status. Your own ingrained habits, formed through years of unreflective living, pull you back toward familiar patterns even when you know they don't serve you. Choosing the examined life means resisting these forces. It means pausing to ask questions when everyone else rushes forward. It means sometimes saying no to opportunities that would bring money or status but would corrupt character or fragment life. It means accepting that you might not achieve conventional success, might not have the biggest house or fanciest title or most impressive resume. It means investing time and energy in character development and relationships rather than maximizing income or productivity. It means being willing to look strange, to be misunderstood, to swim against the current. But here is what makes the choice possible. You are not alone. Throughout history, across all cultures, there have been people who chose the examined life, who pursued virtue and wisdom, who organized their lives around genuine goods rather than external success. Some are famous, philosophers, saints, heroes whose names we remember. But many more are ordinary people whose names history forgets but whose lives testify to the possibility of human excellence. Teachers who shaped generations of students. Parents who raised children with wisdom and love. Friends who remained loyal through difficulty. Workers who did their jobs excellently. Citizens who contributed to their communities. People of character who made the world better through how they lived. You can join this company. You can be one more person who chose flourishing over mere success, character over comfort, examined life over drifting. Your choice matters, not just to you, but to everyone you influence. Your character affects your relationships, your children if you have them, your community, everyone you encounter. Virtue propagates through example and influence. By choosing the examined life, you make it easier for others to make the same choice. You become the kind of person whose presence encourages excellence in others, whose example shows what is possible, whose life demonstrates that human flourishing is real and achievable. And here is the deepest truth. This is what you were made for. Your nature as a rational, social being is oriented toward virtue, wisdom, excellent activity. When you pursue these goods, you are not violating your nature but fulfilling it. When you cultivate character, you are not becoming something alien to yourself but becoming more fully yourself. When you organize life around genuine goods, you are not accepting a burden but claiming your birthright as a human being capable of flourishing. The sense of hollowness that afflicts so many contemporary lives, the feeling that something is missing even in the midst of success and pleasure, the vague dissatisfaction that haunts modern existence. These are symptoms of living against your nature, of pursuing goods that cannot genuinely satisfy, of failing to actualize your potential. They are your nature calling you toward something better, your deepest self protesting against a life that is less than you are capable of living. Aristotle's ethics is not primarily about sacrifice or duty or obligation, though it includes these. At its core, it is about becoming who you truly are, about actualizing your potential, about living the kind of life that brings genuine satisfaction because it expresses and fulfills your nature. It is about liberation, freedom from enslavement to desire, from dependence on external validation, from the tyranny of circumstance. It is about power, the power that comes from developed character, from practical wisdom, from virtue that enables you to respond excellently to whatever life presents. So the choice, finally, is not between happiness and virtue, not between flourishing and doing what's right. It is between genuine flourishing and its counterfeits, between deep satisfaction and shallow pleasures, between a life that actualizes your potential and one that leaves it dormant. It is between becoming fully human and remaining less than you could be. Choose the examined life. Choose virtue over ease. Choose character over comfort. Choose to become who you are capable of being, not because it is easy, it is not. Not because it guarantees success by conventional measures, it does not. But because it is true, because it is good, because it is the path to genuine human flourishing, because it is what you were made for. And know this, the choice is not once for all but daily, moment by moment, in small acts and large. Each time you choose the virtuous response over the easy one, each time you act with practical wisdom rather than mere cleverness, each time you pursue genuine goods rather than pleasant distractions, each time you invest in character rather than image, you are choosing the examined life. You are moving toward flourishing. You are becoming more fully yourself. The path is long, the journey is difficult, you will fail often. You will face obstacles, setbacks, moments of discouragement, but the path is real and it leads somewhere worth going. Others have walked it before you. Others walk it now alongside you. And with each step, with each choice, with each practice of virtue, you become a bit more the person you are meant to be. Closing reassurance. As you drift toward sleep tonight, dear listener, carry with you Aristotle's central insight, that you are a being of potential, capable of growth, oriented toward flourishing. The acorn contains within itself the potential to become an oak, not through wishing or hoping but through natural development given proper conditions. Similarly, you contain within yourself the potential to become a person of virtue and wisdom, of excellent character and practical understanding. This potential is real. It is part of your nature as a rational, social being, and it can be actualized. The path Aristotle illuminated 23 centuries ago remains open, remains walkable, remains worthwhile. It is not easy. He never promised it would be easy. It requires sustained effort, honest self-examination, patience through the long process of character formation. It requires community, education, practice, time. It requires choosing genuine goods over pleasant distractions, virtue over ease, examined life over drifting existence. These choices are difficult, especially in a culture that pushes in opposite directions. But the path is not impossible. Every virtue begins with practice. Every habit forms through repetition. Every journey begins with a single step. You do not need to become fully virtuous tomorrow, do not need to transform your entire life overnight. You need only to begin, to take one step toward virtue, to make one choice aligned with genuine flourishing, to practice one act of courage or temperance or wisdom or justice. And then another, and then another. Gradually, over time, character forms. What felt unnatural becomes natural. What required effort becomes easy. What seemed impossible becomes simply who you are. This is how habituation works. This is how human beings grow. This is how potential becomes actual. You are not alone on this path. You have teachers, Aristotle and countless others who have explored human excellence. You have models, people in your own life and throughout history who demonstrate what virtue looks like. You have friends, companions on the journey who support your growth while you support theirs. You have community, traditions and institutions and practices that have carried this wisdom across generations. You have your own experience, lessons learned through living, insights gained through reflection, wisdom accumulated through paying attention to what works and what does not. Most importantly, you have your own nature, your capacity for reason, for reflection, for deliberate choice. You are not a mere creature of instinct and desire. You are a rational being capable of examining your life, of choosing your path, of directing your own development. This capacity is your dignity, your power, your hope. It means you can change, can grow, can become better than you were. It means your past does not determine your future. Your current state does not define your potential. Your failures do not foreclose flourishing. The person you have been, perhaps ruled by desire, perhaps drifting unreflectively, perhaps enslaved to external validation, perhaps corrupted by vice, this need not be the person you remain. Character can change. Habits can be reformed. New patterns can be established. You can begin again today, now, in this moment. The choice toward examined life is always available, always open, always waiting for you to make it. What would it look like to live more excellently? What would it mean to organize your life around genuine goods rather than external success? What might change if you prioritized character over comfort, virtue over ease, flourishing over mere pleasure? These are not abstract philosophical questions, but practical invitations to reimagine your life, to consider different possibilities, to glimpse what you might become. Perhaps it means changing how you spend your time, less passive consumption, more active engagement, less distraction, more contemplation, less screen time, more presence with people you love. Perhaps it means examining your work, asking whether it uses your capacities excellently, whether it contributes to genuine goods, whether it expresses who you are and want to become. Perhaps it means deepening relationships, moving beyond casual acquaintance toward genuine friendship, investing time and attention in people who matter, being vulnerable enough to be truly known and loved. Perhaps it means beginning a daily practice, morning reflection on your intentions, evening examination of your actions, regular study of philosophy or literature that feeds your understanding, consistent exercise of virtues you want to develop. Perhaps it means finding teachers and models, seeking out people whose character you admire, studying their examples, letting their lives show you what is possible. Perhaps it means joining a community oriented towards similar values, a philosophical discussion group, a religious community, any gathering of people committed to living examined lives. The specific changes will be unique to you, to your circumstances, to your particular needs and challenges. But the direction is universal, toward virtue, toward wisdom, toward excellent activity, toward genuine flourishing. This is the telos, the end toward which your nature orients you. This is what you were made for, what will genuinely satisfy, what actualizes your deepest potential. Do not be discouraged by the difficulty of the path or the distance yet to travel. The person who plants an acorn does not expect an oak tree tomorrow. They know that growth takes time, that development follows natural rhythms, that patience is required. Similarly with character development. You are planting seeds of virtue, of wisdom, of excellent habits. These seeds will grow, will develop according to their nature, will produce fruit in time. But they need tending, regular attention, consistent practice, proper conditions. Do not be discouraged by failures and setbacks. The person learning to play piano does not give up when they hit wrong notes. They recognize that mistakes are part of learning, that mastery comes through practice that includes failure. Similarly with virtue. You will act cowardly when courage is called for. You will be intemperate when temperance matters. You will make foolish choices despite your growing wisdom. This is normal, expected, not a sign that you cannot grow but evidence that you are human. What matters is not perfection but direction, not avoiding all failure but learning from it, not being flawless but being committed to growth. Do not be discouraged by the judgments of others. Many will not understand what you are pursuing. They will call you naive for believing in virtue, impractical for choosing character over success, foolish for organizing life around goods that are not impressive or marketable. Let them think what they will. You know what matters. You know what genuinely satisfies. You know the difference between the life that looks successful and the life that is actually flourishing. You are choosing substance over appearance, reality over image, genuine goods over counterfeits. Know this, the work you do on your own character is perhaps the most important work you will ever do, more important than career success, more valuable than accumulated wealth, more lasting than any achievement or accomplishment. For character remains when all external goods are stripped away. Character travels with you through every circumstance. Character cannot be taken from you by misfortune or loss. Character is who you are, not what you have or what you've done, but the kind of person you've become. This is what makes character development so urgent and so worthwhile. You are building your very self, sculpting the person you will be, actualizing potentials that will define your existence. Every choice matters because every choice shapes character. Every action counts because every action reinforces or undermines virtue. Every day is significant because every day is an opportunity to move toward flourishing or away from it. But this urgency need not produce anxiety. You are not alone, not without guidance, not facing an impossible task. The wisdom of ages stands behind you, Aristotle and countless others who mapped this territory, who walked this path, who passed on their understanding. The support of community surrounds you, friends, teachers, fellow travelers who share the journey. Your own capacity for growth empowers you, the rational nature that makes change possible, the social nature that makes learning from others feasible, the developmental nature that orients you toward actualization. And time is your ally. Character forms gradually through sustained practice across years and decades. You need not accomplish everything now. You need only to maintain direction, to keep choosing growth, to continue the work day by day. The person who walks steadily, even slowly, covers great distances. The person who practices consistently, even imperfectly, achieves remarkable development. Small choices compound. Daily practices accumulate. Steady effort produces transformation. So rest now, knowing that the wisdom we have explored together tonight has been planted like a seed in the depths of your being. You have encountered Aristotle's vision of human flourishing, what it means, how to pursue it, why it matters. You have considered the virtues that constitute excellent character and the practical wisdom that guides their application. You have examined the role of friendship and community in human life. You have glimpsed the contemplative dimension that connects us to the eternal. You have been invited to choose examined life over drifting existence, virtue over ease, genuine flourishing over its counterfeits. These insights are not merely intellectual content, not just information to be stored and possibly recalled. They are invitations to transformation, seeds of possibility, potential that can become actual in your life. Like the acorn that contains the oak, these ideas contain within themselves the capacity to reshape how you live, to redirect your choices, to reform your character. But potential requires actualization. Seeds must be watered and tended. Insights must be reflected upon and applied. In the days and weeks ahead, these ideas will continue to work in you, sometimes consciously as you remember and reflect, sometimes unconsciously as they influence your perceptions and choices. You may find yourself noticing your own patterns more clearly, seeing where you exhibit virtue and where vice, becoming more aware of the habituation that shapes you. You may find yourself making different choices, small ones at first, perhaps larger ones over time, choices that align with the examined life Aristotle describes. You may find yourself drawn toward practices and communities that support character development, toward friends who share these values, toward activities that exercise your capacities excellently. This is the beginning, not the end. The journey toward flourishing is long, is lifelong, continues until our final breath. But it is a journey worth taking, perhaps the only journey that ultimately matters. For what profit is there in gaining the whole world but losing your own soul? What benefit in achieving every external success but failing to actualize your potential, to become who you might have been, to live the life you were capable of living? Aristotle knew what we sometimes forget, that we are not merely survival machines, not just consumers and producers, not simply roles and accomplishments. We are human beings with a specific nature and characteristic excellences, with potential for virtue and wisdom and excellent activity, with capacity for friendship and contemplation and flourishing. We are beings of potential oriented toward actualization, incomplete until we become what we are capable of being. The good life, eudaimonia, flourishing, genuine happiness, consists in the excellent performance of our characteristic activities as rational social beings. It consists in virtue cultivated through habituation, in practical wisdom developed through experience, in friendships grounded in mutual virtue, in communities that support human excellence, in contemplation of what is eternally true. This is not easy, not guaranteed, not achievable through wishing or hoping alone. But it is real, it is possible, and it is worthwhile. You have the capacity for this life. The potential exists within you now, real though not yet fully actual. What will determine whether it actualizes? Your choices, your practices, your persistence through difficulty, your willingness to examine your life, to question your patterns, to change what needs changing, your courage to resist cultural pressures that push toward unreflective existence, your wisdom to recognize genuine goods amid countless distractions and counterfeits, your commitment to the long, difficult, rewarding work of becoming who you are meant to be. The examined life calls you. Virtue beckons you. Flourishing awaits your pursuit. The path Aristotle illuminated stretches before you, walked by countless others before and beside you, leading toward the fullest realization of your human potential. You need only choose it, not once but daily, not perfectly but persistently, not without difficulty but with confidence that the journey is worthwhile, that the destination is real, that the effort will bear fruit. Sleep well, dear friend. Rest in the knowledge that you are a being of potential, that growth is possible, that flourishing is real. Tomorrow brings new choices, new opportunities to practice virtue, new moments to exercise practical wisdom. Tomorrow the journey continues, but tonight rest. Let these ideas settle, let this wisdom work in you, let the seed that has been planted begin to grow. For you are not what you were when we began this journey hours ago. Something has shifted, however subtly. An invitation has been extended and perhaps partially accepted. A possibility has been glimpsed. A path has been illuminated. And though the journey is long and the work demanding, you do not walk alone. You walk in the company of all those who have pursued human excellence across the ages, guided by wisdom tested through centuries, oriented toward a flourishing that is real because it is grounded in your nature, possible because you possess the capacities required, worthwhile because it is what you were made for. This is Aristotle's gift to you, not merely ideas about virtue, but a comprehensive vision of human life at its best. Not just theories about flourishing, but practical guidance for achieving it. Not merely philosophical speculation, but wisdom for living. May you receive this gift well. May you let it shape your seeing and inform your choosing. May you walk the path it illuminates, gradually becoming the person you are capable of being, actualizing the potential that has always been present within you, flourishing in the fullest sense as a rational, social, virtuous being living excellently in community with others while reaching toward the eternal through contemplation. The work begins tomorrow, but tonight rest. You have done the important work of opening yourself to wisdom, of considering possibilities, of glimpsing what you might become. That is enough for now. Sleep comes now, bringing with it the deep regeneration that prepares you for tomorrow's journey. And when you wake, you will carry with you, whether consciously remembered or working below the surface, the seed of Aristotelian wisdom that has been planted tonight, ready to grow, ready to bear fruit, ready to transform your life toward genuine flourishing. Rest now, knowing that the wisdom we've explored together tonight lives within you, a resource you can draw on whenever you need guidance, whenever you face difficult choices, whenever you wonder how to live. Aristotle's voice joins the chorus of teachers and friends and your own deepest wisdom, pointing you always toward virtue, toward excellence, toward the full realization of your human potential. The path of examined life stretches before you, challenging but navigable, difficult but deeply worthwhile. Walk it with courage. Walk it with practical wisdom. Walk it with the patience to know that transformation takes time and the persistence to keep choosing growth despite setbacks and failures. Walk it knowing you do not walk alone, but in the company of all those who have pursued human excellence, guided by wisdom that has survived 23 centuries, because it speaks to something eternal in the human condition. And in walking this path, in choosing virtue, in pursuing flourishing, in becoming who you are capable of being, you honor not only Aristotle's memory but your own potential, your own nature, your own deepest calling toward excellence and wisdom and the good life. Sleep well, flourish well. Live excellently. This is what Aristotle would wish for you. This is what you deserve. This is what you are capable of. And this is what awaits you on the path we have explored together tonight. Rest now. Tomorrow the journey continues. But tonight peace. Tonight rest. Tonight the quiet confidence that you are on a path worth walking, that genuine flourishing is possible, that you can become who you were always meant to be. Good night, dear friend. May your dreams be peaceful, your rest restorative, your tomorrow full of opportunities to practice virtue and move toward flourishing. And may the wisdom of Aristotle, planted tonight like a seed in fertile soil, grow within you toward its full fruition. A life of virtue, wisdom, excellent activity, loving relationships, contemplative understanding, and genuine human flourishing. Sleep well.